Events begin to unfold in the library, where a young man delves into a mysterious book about magical rituals that require the sacrifice of one's own soul. The mysterious guy's name is Su Fu, and he is currently outside his home world. Previously, Su came from another dimension known as Earth. It was hard to believe, but he was actually reborn in a completely different world. After being reborn, he found himself in a city reminiscent of the modern, earthly era, but almost all of its inhabitants had supernatural abilities, and the city he ended up in was called Halley City. Ordinary people, half-humans, and sometimes even real psionics live here. Due to the peculiarities of his soul, the main character does not possess the supernatural abilities characteristic of this world. Over the past 18 years, he has made great efforts to change this, but to no avail. However, today he still managed to find the long-awaited clue that he had spent so much time searching for. Suddenly, a mysterious girl with rabbit ears approached him, asking if she could help him choose a book. The good-natured guy replied that he didn't need help and that he could handle it himself. Realizing that the guy was not interested in the book, the librarian put it on the shelf. Getting up from his chair, the hero headed towards the exit, showing no interest in the book. Su Fu had one eye closed, covered with a bandage, and he walked with the help of a cane held in his hand. As he walked outside, the boy thought about how he would probably have to use someone's life for the ritual described in the book. The desire to gain supernatural powers was so strong that he thought about the price he would have to pay to kill demons, elves, or living beings, even though it was very difficult. After returning home, Su immediately went to the refrigerator, feeling very hungry. Taking the food, he began to cook, listening to the news on TV, which reported 3 murders committed by a serial killer. According to the investigation, the killer had no connections with the victims, which made the motives for his crimes mysterious. Police were actively searching for the perpetrator, who was described by a witness as a man in goatskin with paint on his face, hence the nickname, the Goatskin Killer. The news of a serial killer, known as the Goatskin Killer, shocked the boy, as such a criminal could be armed with a firearm, and people were advised to stay away from previous incidents and to immediately inform the police of suspicious circumstances. After preparing the food, Su Fu took out some microchips from the cabinet to use his knowledge to restore the mechanism he had previously created. He worked diligently, trying to do everything he could to help find the killer. It turned out that he was assembling a joystick to control some kind of mechanism. While the local police were unable to catch the killer, and Su Fu himself felt powerless in this matter, he knew a man who could help him. His friend, answering the phone, said in surprise that he thought Su Fu had died in the incident last year. There was no limit to happiness when it became clear that he was alive and also interested in catching the killer. A killer in goat skin is freely roaming the city, but so far not a single living witness to his crimes has been found. However, the friend is sure that someone definitely knows something about him. The guy decided to contact a man named Adam, who, according to his friend, might have the necessary information. Despite rumors of his unreliability, the information he provided was reliable. The informant was credited with spreading rumors about his partner's betrayal. Su Fu decided to contact Adam, despite his reputation, and make a small deal. The guy didn't like traitors, but he believed that this wouldn't create big problems for him. Seeing the ringing phone, he answered immediately. It was Adam, using a special voice-changing program and remaining discreet. The guy approached him and asked for information about the killer in the goat skin. Adam warned of the danger, but agreed to pass on the information after receiving the money. The information was worth money, and he had no idea why Su Fu was using it, but he warned her of the possible consequences. After receiving the payment, Adam planned to send the information to the mailbox almost instantly. At the same time, Su Fu realized that this informant was a genuine source of recommendations recommended by his acquaintances, since he even provided documents from the Public Security Service. Not only did he provide information about the investigation into the case, but he was also able to provide a detailed psychological profile and various rumors about the person. The letter also contained information about his own investigation and the murder investigation conducted by Adam himself. The hero was truly amazed at how much the informant was concerned about this serial killer topic. Sometime later, in a dubious dark street, events continued to unfold. A murderer was walking down the street, leading a little girl by the hand, who asked his name, and he replied that she could simply call him an evil demon. The killer began to laugh and suggested that she would no longer need his name, as she would soon be screaming in pain and suffering. The girl, hearing this, decided that he was just joking and that it was all a fiction. In fact, someone was watching the killer and his victim, studying his behavior. This mysterious observer was the main character, who hid his face under a mask and was dressed unusually for everyday life. Coming closer to the girl, the killer seriously stated that he was not joking, since something similar had happened before. All this time, the girl saw only a cute little sheep nearby, who was leading her somewhere. Suddenly, someone started talking about how in ancient times people often hunted sheep, and the killer heard it. It was the main character who also noted that the sheep were not strong or aggressive, and they easily became victims of experienced hunters. Hunting techniques and methods later evolved into hunting rituals. Over time, the art of hunting turned into witchcraft used everywhere. Thanks to this witchcraft, hostile people and animals became victims of hunters. Suddenly, the young man dropped his cane, pretending it was an accident. Falling to the floor, Su Fu began to pretend that he was ill and asked for help. The girl immediately rushed to him, seeing that he was really ill. In fact, the main character didn't need any help at all. In fact, his goal was to attract the attention of the killer, who was carefully hiding. By spraying sleeping pills in the girl's face, the hero intended to hide their fight and plan revenge on the killer. The killer became enraged and almost lost his mind, as the young man had interfered with his hunt. Su Fu was eager for a bloody ritual of sacrifice, which he declared to the scoundrel. He also hinted that the villain was suitable for the sacrificial ritual. With a villainous grin, he couldn't believe it, assuming that the guy was suffering from serious mental problems. Meanwhile, Su Fu decided to find out whether the scoundrel would willingly join him or whether he should break his leg and take him away. Suddenly, the villain ran to attack Su, approaching with incredible speed to strike. Luckily, the brave guy easily repelled the villain's attack with his cane. The fight continued, and the hero did everything possible to win and use the killer for the ritual. The boy's cane contained a blade that would influence the outcome of the battle. Continuing to fight, the young man threatened the scoundrel, calling on him to surrender, since continuing the fight was pointless. However, the killer had a magic shield that easily repelled the attack. The villain was initially shocked that an ordinary person could attack him, but the attack was repelled. The scoundrel laughed and admitted that Su Fu was a good fighter, but the weapon in his hands was ordinary and not dangerous for a magician. As the villain counterattacked, he could not understand what advantage such a weapon could provide. He tried his best to tear the mask off the stranger's face so he could see him and make him show his wounds. Meanwhile, the hero understood that hitting the villain would mean his end, given the power of his attacks. Fearing the consequences, Su Fu paused to think about how to defeat the assassin. It turned out that the killer had specifically chosen this alley, anticipating the possibility of an ambush. He began to laugh, noticing that at this time of day, there were almost no passers-by here, allowing them to freely continue the fight without worrying about possible witnesses. The villain convinced himself that the young man had come here to save the girl. But it was clear to him that instead of saving the girl, he himself would become another victim of this evening. Striking again, the villain realized that he needed to change tactics, realizing that the current approach was ineffective. The embittered killer screamed his love for the fear of others, but at the same time noted that the screams of his victim irritated him. Enjoying the fear of his victim, he tried to prevent her screams. After the fight, the killer first considered taking away the protagonist's voice before deciding to punish him. He then planned to cause serious damage to the boy, rendering him unable to walk. Each attack became stronger, and the hero had difficulty dodging the blows. Looking at his victim, the killer claimed that the only feeling he would have left was pain. With a crazy look, he predicted that the hero would suffer for a week, experiencing all kinds of pain, until he realized that death was better. Looking at the killer, the hero asked if he believed his words, shocking the villain. This was followed by a strong blow to the face, causing the killer to scream in pain. The attack was so strong that the villain dropped his weapon and appeared defenseless. Hitting the wall, he experienced even more pain, screaming, without hope for help. Realizing what was happening, the killer was confused. The hero's defense was incredible, perhaps even supernatural, but it had a flaw. The flaw was that the killer could not use the energy for acceleration and defense at the same time. The protagonist prepared for the final battle, preparing to use supernatural means. In a fit of rage and despair, the villain began to beg for mercy when he realized that his screams would not help. Realizing that his pleas were useless, the criminal pulled out a gun and ordered the guy to stay back. This situation instantly reminded the hero of the events that took place 2 years ago. Su Fu was eager to learn from his comrade how to overcome his fear. The comrade only laughed at this question, saying that no one was capable of this. Looking at his friend, Su tried to understand why this was happening, because he knew several brave men who had overcome the fear of death. In the opinion of his comrade, these people were absolutely reckless and devoid of common sense, since they resigned themselves to death. Realizing the madness of this, the hero realized that ordinary people, like him, would not be able to cope with their fear. However, according to a friend, ordinary people who claim to be ordinary are mostly not trustworthy. Still, the partner had one method, and to consider fear as a disease and to present it as immunity. In this case, ordinary people can take medicine, and the hero became interested in what medicine they were talking about. The medicine was complex, the idea had its value, but the side effects were significant, and yet the comrade did not mean physical medicines. And it was not a powerful spiritual technique. Fear could only be conquered by feeling it. Returning to the present, Sue told the killer that there were few people to be seen on the street at this time. Raising his weapon, the boy reminded that there was no point in shouting for help. The hero remembered the words of the killer, who said that he first planned to deprive him of his voice. These words frightened the villain even more, who realized that he was powerless. Within minutes, the killer was already begging for mercy, but Sue decided to use him for his own purposes. Having destroyed the criminal, the young man began to use the knowledge gained from the book to perform an unusual ritual. First, he took out some red ink and began drawing symbols for the ritual on the floor. The ritual that was performed was called the blood sacrifice to Hastur. The main purpose of this ritual was to offer a living sacrifice to the god Hastur, who exists in one of the parallel universes, in exchange for the desired gift. Dragging the criminal to the painted symbol, Su Fu sought to quickly perform the ritual in order to become a practitioner with Hastur's help. The killer begged for mercy, but the young man understood that his victims were also begging for mercy. In any case, the criminal did not leave the victims unpunished. Rather, on the contrary, he tried to aggravate their suffering and horror. With the power of his voice, the villain shouted his repentance, promising to fulfill all of Su Fu's wishes. Looking at him made the protagonist understand that he enjoyed the suffering of others, and this scoundrel was filled with pleasure when others lost their minds from fear, and his goal was only to bring torment. Today the criminal will pay for all his crimes, and after the ritual, they will be able to find common ground. During the ritual, Su Fu would call upon an invisible god to offer the murderer as a sacrifice and gain supernatural powers. The criminal screamed in pain, experiencing agony from the ritual being performed. After the ritual was completed, the villain remained silent, as if he had lost his voice. Looking at the sheet of paper with the spell, the hero realized that something went wrong during the ritual. Suddenly, the criminal burst out laughing, as if he had heard the funniest joke. Su simply watched the events unfold, trying to understand the consequences of the ritual. As the criminal laughed, a magical aura began to emanate from his body. This magical power affected Su, giving him supernatural abilities, but was accompanied by hellish pain. The ritual was successful, and thanks to it the main character received magical abilities. All the candles in the circle went out, signaling the end of the ritual. All that remained of the criminal was a black mass, impossible to identify. Strange creatures resembling octopuses began to appear around. These creatures began to devour the remains of the body of the criminal, who disappeared without a trace. It was a shocking sight for Su. He couldn't imagine that unknown creatures would devour corpse. When the creature had finished its feast, it approached Su. Looking at it, the boy realized that the author of the book may not have warned about such side effects of the ritual. However, he remembered that perhaps the author had mentioned this phenomenon after all. And indeed, the book spoke of such creatures. Hastur in this universe was an ancient god. His appearance was unimaginable, and his moral principles were very different from those of humans. Meeting him is comparable to a person trying to fall asleep next to a nest of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes cannot understand a person's thoughts, and the person does not care about the survival of their queen. Therefore, meeting an ancient god like Hastur led to madness, not to mention performing a ritual to summon him. The more miraculous abilities the summoner possesses, the weaker his resistance to this influence. The exception is a person whose soul arrived in the world where the summoning is being performed from a world that is not magical at all, and that person will have very little, if any, magical ability. The boy didn't understand why he didn't pay attention to this remark, and then he remembered that his abilities were weak, and his world was far from magic. Having found an unknown ritual, he began it without precautions and immediately began it. Another mistake was using the magician as a sacrifice to summon the ancient deity. This was due to his desire to become a mage being so strong that he could not accept himself as not being one. Perhaps he had been exposed to the blood ritual immediately after reading it, but had not realized it, and now all he could do was get as far away from here as possible. As he walked through the city, he saw that the area had changed, turning into a gorge with a cemetery. Su Fu couldn't determine whether this was really happening or just an illusion. As he passed the unknown creatures, he noticed that they were watching him, remaining motionless like statues. Due to his inattention, the guy decided to look at one of the statues, and it smiled back at him. As soon as he noticed this strange statue, magical tentacles immediately wrapped around his leg. Feeling intense pain, the boy realized that in this world one cannot look anyone in the eye. He immediately closed his eyes, depriving himself of the opportunity to look back again. This clever trick helped him get out of the illusory world and return back to reality. Deciding to take a look around, he decided to remove the bandage to check if anything had changed in his body. After removing the bandage, he began to carefully examine his body, hoping to discover supernatural abilities. However, nothing unusual was detected, and he did not feel anything abnormal. Despite this, his right leg was now healthy, and he realized that the ritual had worked, and he was now completely cured of his disability. This result of the ritual filled the protagonist with joy, because he again became an ordinary person with healthy limbs. However, it seems he never acquired any supernatural powers. But if you listen to the voice of reason, it seems a little strange. In his ritual, the boy clearly expressed his desire to gain supernatural powers, but did not mention anything about his healing. Moreover, the information he had studied did not indicate that the ritual could cure his physical disabilities. The guy came to the conclusion that perhaps some problems had arisen during the ritual, but he did not remember anything like that. So he suggested that the problem might be with his victim. Maybe the killer wasn't a suitable victim. He thought about how once the ritual was complete, the killer in sheep's clothing and all his attributes disappeared, as if the entire event had been just an illusion. This was good news for him, as it would save him the effort of cleaning up the crime scene. Approaching the girl, he tried to wake her up to find out if she remembered anything. The girl, waking up, remembered that the guy sprayed a strange spray on her, after which she fell asleep. The memories made her panic, but she still wanted to remember what happened before. She remembered that they had come with some stranger who wore a sheepskin, and she thought he was her friend, but in fact he was a complete stranger to her. After telling her the truth about what had happened, he explained that the man was a criminal and a murderer in sheep's clothing. Now she was safe, and she didn't have to worry about her life anymore. The girl wanted to know who he was, but he decided not to tell her about it. As she was leaving, she said her name was Helen and thanked him for saving her. After some time, the guy found himself in the toilet to wash off the smell of various perfumes. He then washed his hands to get rid of the smell of blood that had soaked his hands. While he was getting dressed, he was still wondering whether he should continue to pretend to be disabled. For him, it was a way to escape helplessness, although he was no longer disabled, but he wanted everyone to think so. Otherwise, he will have a hard time explaining to his family why he suddenly recovered from his disability. Presumably, the change in the nature of the ritual is connected with what is in the soul of the murderer, hiding under the mask of virtue, which the hero sacrificed. Therefore, Haster, responding to his call, personally changed the result of the ritual so that the reward corresponded to the victim, which is how Su Fu restored his body. After getting out of the taxi, the young man headed home, wanting to rest a little. As he entered the house, he reflected that while there was a huge risk in trading with Haster, the benefits of such a ritual were also huge. So the guy had to find a next victim for the ritual as soon as possible. In his apartment, the young man met a mysterious stranger who was smoking and waiting for the missing Su Fu. It turned out that it was the protagonist's father, and he was at a loss, not knowing where his son was. While keeping an eye on his son, the father noticed that he hadn't even changed his clothes. To this, the hero simply replied that he simply forgot to take a change of clothes with him, which is why he was unable to change. The observant father continued to watch his son and noticed that his hair was clean and his hands smelled of cologne. Suddenly, Su Fu's phone rang, although it was already late. It was his friend named Adam, and in the presence of his father, who was not only a police officer but also had supernatural powers, the boy could not answer the call. After rejecting the call, Su Fu justified himself by saying that it was just spam. The experienced policeman became interested in how the young man determined that it was spam. Confused, the guy replied that now all calls have specific labels, which allows mobile phone users to easily identify what kind of call it is. Father said that he urgently needed to go to the office. The son decided to find out why his father had to work at such a time and why he came home at all. In reality, the man simply thought that his son might be lonely. The father realized that he was not the best father, as he was constantly away at work, and because of this, he rarely paid attention to his sons. He realized that if he had spent more time with them, perhaps the accident would not have happened. Listening to his father, Su Fu knew that this was true. When the door closed, the guy looked at an old photograph taken a long time ago. In it, he was still little, together with his younger brother Xiao Ji. The protagonist's father in this life is named Su Xingxing. He works as a senior police officer in Heli City and is often absent from work. Xiao Ji's younger brother is studying in a boarding school because his father spends little time raising his son. So it became common for the boy to return home and find no one there, and this gave him more free time. After his father left, the hero called his friend, and Adam wanted to know if he was getting closer to the maniac in sheep's clothing. Enraged, the guy shouted that Adam might not hear anything from him if he continued to try to set him up, and his friend began to apologize and said that if the hero really wanted to kill the maniac, he should wait. Sufu decided not to discuss his relationship with the maniac in sheep's clothing and asked Adam if it would bring him trouble. In reality, the friend did not want the hero to kill this killer because he wanted to ask him one question. He was very insistent that the killer remain alive to ask this question, and if the hero agrees to temporarily postpone his plans, then his friend is ready to provide him with information about the new target to defuse this situation. After his friend expressed his desire, the guy asked with interest what exactly was being discussed, but Adam did not answer this question. As a result, the hero was forced to disappoint him because Adam's call was too late, and the friend even thought that he was mistaken since information about the location of the killer in sheep's clothing was transmitted this evening. Adam was surprised because according to his watch it was not yet midnight, and Sufu was saying that he had already found and destroyed the killer in sheep's clothing. If Adam's call had come a little earlier, there might have been a chance to see him alive. The protagonist's actions truly amazed Adam, who could not understand how a person could destroy such a wanted killer in a few hours. The clever friend understood that if they had failed to ask the question while the killer was alive, then the only option left was to get the information from his body. Immediately after this, Adam asked the guy where the body of this maniac in sheep's clothing was. Without hesitation, Sufu replied that the killer's body no longer existed. Despite this, the friend still insisted on providing coordinates of where the killer's remains might be, even if they were thrown into the river. In the process of communicating with Adam, the hero thought that he was either a psychic or knew psychics or had access to medical technologies that could extract information. In essence, the murderer in sheep's clothing was banished from this universe along with his soul and body, where he became prey for the gods of different universes. Suddenly, Adam announced that he knew a place where they could meet to get acquainted in person tomorrow evening. Their client who needed this information would also be there. Fearing the consequences of such a meeting, the hero immediately asked who their client was and why. It turns out that a friend's client is investigating the activities of a local mysterious organization, and he doesn't know who he really is or where this organization comes from. Even Adam himself has interest in this organization, so he took on this matter. Half an hour ago, a client called Adam and said that the killer in sheep's clothing was actually the owner of an illegal auto repair shop and did not have paranormal abilities. He probably acquired supernatural powers through a mysterious organization. Sufu immediately realized that this organization could transform ordinary people into possessors of power, and the assassin in sheep's clothing was one of those awakened. After this news, the guy was really shocked and immediately hung up. As he removed the blindfold, he wondered how exactly this anomaly could have affected the results of the ritual. The following events unfolded the next day in a cozy restaurant on the outskirts of the city. When the hero sat down at the table, the waiter approached him and asked what he would like to order. The guy awkwardly ordered a cup of coffee. The waiter, feeling slightly perplexed, wrote down the strange customer's order in order to fulfill it later. The hero's behavior was strange, as from time to time he began to see the same illusion as after the ritual. Although the situation was not as critical as during the ceremony, he did not begin to confuse the telephone pole with a person or anything like that. However, this has already affected his daily life, and this morning at the vegetable market he wanted the stall owner to sell him an incomprehensible alien creature, but for some time the guy could not find the right words. Fortunately, the stall owner understood him and, seeing what Sufu was pointing at, asked him if he wanted to buy it. After that, the guy used this shopping method again and recently purchased several yellow plant rhizomes, dark brown ingredients that resemble umbrellas, and ingredients that imitate white flowers. When a young man returned home, these unusual purchases turned out to be simple chicken, ginger, champignons, and porcini mushrooms. Right now, Sufu could only hope that this side effect would be temporary and the day it would pass would come as soon as possible. A few seconds later, Adam called the protagonist on the phone to say that he had already arrived. The young man immediately said that he was also in the restaurant and was ready for the meeting. The protagonist's surprise was boundless, as he saw that Adam was actually a girl. The stranger immediately asked the waiter to bring her a cup of tea with milk. Sitting down at the table, the girl immediately assumed that Sufu could not have expected something like this. In fact, whether it is in a regular job or in black market transactions, especially when it comes to the latter, men treat women carelessly. As soon as the hero heard this, he immediately understood that this was why the stranger was using the name Adam. This mysterious girl also used a device to change her voice to sound like a man's. It was really unusual for the guy, but he treated the girl with caution because even if she was sitting in front of him now, this was not necessarily her real personality. Suddenly, a strange stranger with red hair and a mask on his face approached the couple. The stranger immediately sat down at the table with a couple who were already waiting for him. The girl explained that this guy's name was Hasegawa. He was the same client she had mentioned earlier, and he also had paranormal abilities. Upon hearing this name, Sufu immediately knew that the person named Hasegawa was most likely the one who invested in the housing during the construction stage. In this case, the protagonist also decided not to give his real name and introduced himself as Haster Lovecraft, and the stranger also introduced herself as Miss Sunny Shangri-La. For everyone, these were truly unusual pseudonyms, and they understood that each was hiding his real name. Watching the hero closely, Hasegawa immediately asked if he really killed that maniac in sheep's clothing. Having started drinking coffee, the guy answered without hesitation that this was indeed the case. This greatly confused Hasegawa, as he couldn't understand how this was possible since the guy in front of him wasn't one of their circle. Smiling, the guy explained that there were many ways to kill someone like him. For example, if Adam wanted to kill him, she would simply add poison to his drink. Hasegawa knew that Adam had no motive to kill him, and that their kind do not die from poisons, and Haster Lovecraft explained that someone who wants to kill you, if they have serious intentions, will never make it clear that they have a motive to eliminate someone. Moreover, normal poisons are ineffective against those like Hasegawa, who have paranormal abilities. This answer interested the stranger even more, and he wanted to know how the maniac in sheep's clothing was killed, what methods of murder were used, and where his body was. Haster Lovecraft knew that this could be a trap, and before they got to that, he wanted to hear more information about the mysterious organization they were talking about. The protagonist was also interested in the connection between the organization and the killer in sheep's clothing. These words began to irritate Hasegawa, and he demanded that the protagonist answer his question first. The guy didn't like this and started arguing, saying that he had already answered his question and now it was Hasegawa's turn to answer. Becoming even more irritated, Hasegawa shouted that he wanted the boy to understand that there was always the option to change the way the question was asked, and it would be much more effective. Watching him, the hero realized that his way of negotiating was directly connected to underground organizations and the black market. He realized that this kind of dialogue was turning their communication into an endless game of exchanging insults, and he didn't want to lower his level to Hasegawa's. Smiling, Haster Lovecraft asked why Hasegawa preferred words over actions. As he stood up, the stranger began to talk about how killing a maniac in sheep's clothing who had woken up thanks to drugs had given him the wrong idea about people with superpowers. With the help of his magical abilities, Hasegawa wanted to help him get rid of these misconceptions. This behavior alarmed Sunny Shangri-La, and she shouted at the boys to wait and not start a fight. But as soon as the impudent fellow extended his hand, the main character stopped him. Then, using his powers, he powerfully threw back the impudent man who dared to attack him. While observing him, Haster Lovecraft realized that Hasegawa was acting like a savage, and his behavior was opposite to his usual way of life. In addition, he seemed to be one of the most powerful among those with superpowers, which is why, even when faced with danger, he could predict what would happen next and avoid the worst consequences. Moreover, both of these men are so deeply fascinated by the secret identity of the killer in sheep's clothing that arouses serious suspicion. Meanwhile, the waiter approached the man who had fallen and asked if he was okay. As soon as Hasegawa returned to the table, he immediately asked the protagonist if he was the faceless one. This statement confused the girl, because she heard others mention that the faceless one died a year ago, and who could have imagined that he was still alive and moving freely. The main character was given the nickname Faceless, and the inhabitants of this city called him that. And the reason for this is quite simple, and he never showed his real face, especially when he had to move through the darkest areas of the city. Even his former partner had never seen his real face, which is why he was considered faceless. But that's not all, and for a long time no one even guessed that the hero was hiding his identity. However, after he was betrayed by his former partner, everyone found out that he actually did not show his real face, which is why they began to call him Faceless. Long ago, many tried to kill him in various ways, but ultimately it proved useless. As one could see, it was too naive for those present to think that just a few people with paranormal abilities would be able to finish him off. And Hasegawa immediately objected, stating that the protagonist should understand that any loud statement has its limits. Watching this guy, the young man realized that he really was a difficult guy if he had already decided to object. Sufu himself also felt that his statements were too loud, and because of this, he even felt like his face was burning. But ever since he became involved in the affairs of the underworld, he has awakened from this illusion. The people in this underground world could only be described as inhumane. They would instantly devour you as soon as they noticed weakness. And in this underground world, even the appearance of any kind of inferiority was immediately regarded as doubting one's own abilities. After that, the guy said that they shouldn't measure their strength because he wanted to find out what kind of mysterious organization they were looking for information about so badly. It turned out that they were looking for this organization because, with the help of drugs, these people turn ordinary people into possessors of paranormal abilities. Hearing this, the hero immediately thought that the activities of this organization did not look so bad. In fact, all medications must undergo rigorous testing and scientific research before they are used. Initial testing was mainly done on animals. The problem, however, is that the drugs being studied by this mysterious organization are primarily aimed at human physiological characteristics, with the ultimate goal being to forcibly alter human physiology. Physiological changes bring about changes in the psyche, and together they ultimately lead to a change in the soul, which in turn brings about awakening. Therefore, this drug cannot be tested on animals and can only be tested directly on humans, which is what the young man suggested. His guess turned out to be correct, and he understood what he heard correctly because this is not a completely ethical technology, so they naturally cannot openly recruit volunteers. The volunteers themselves, who were reluctant to come forward, wanted to get involved with something like that, so they decided to turn to the black market and buy test subjects from slave traders. However, Adam explained that even if they were just test subjects, there were special requirements for them, and these mice had to have outstanding talents in the field of paranormal abilities. This interested the protagonist, and he decided to find out why this was so important. It turned out that their cure was currently only halfway completed, and therefore only people with outstanding talents in the field of paranormal abilities could be awakened. But even then, there are huge risks and a huge number of side effects that cannot simply be ignored. All this is to ultimately create a safe product that will allow even people with less predisposition to possessing paranormal abilities to undergo awakening, and after that they collect data and move on to their next steps. However, due to the fact that the slave traders cannot provide them with a sufficient number of suitable test subjects, they decided to look for them themselves, starting their search in the city, as well as in the surrounding towns and villages. A mass abduction of people with low social status was launched, all in order to obtain the necessary number of test subjects for their experiments. The smart young man immediately realized that the top brass of this mysterious organization were filled with amateurs from the criminal world. To Hasegawa, this was a startling statement, and he wanted to understand how the hero knew about it. The guy understood that this mysterious organization was kidnapping people directly from their own area of residence, and local security services could easily track such incidents. If criminal organizations do not have sufficient professionalism, they often decide to operate in close proximity to their place of residence. However, if they were professionals, they would have chosen a remote location where the disappearance of a couple of people would not arouse any suspicion. Sunny Shangri-La agreed. However, the organization is engaged in scientific research, so it must have smart people working there, although the bosses who make decisions initially made a mistake due to their unprofessionalism. They quickly discovered their mistake and quickly devised a plan to avoid attracting the attention of local security. Using the method of deduction, Haster Lovecraft realized that the killer in sheep's clothing was the key figure in this case. A mysterious organization found a killer in sheep's clothing and deliberately gave him a half-finished drug to test his paranormal abilities. This drug causes a supernatural awakening that is significantly different from a normal awakening. Awakening is achieved through the sacrifice of one's own soul and can cause significant psychological changes in the person taking the drug. The sheep's clothing killer was originally criminally inclined, but the strength and side effects of the drug allowed him to overcome all his fears, resulting in him kidnapping locals and brutally killing them. In order to successfully commit crimes, the mysterious organization even provided him with supernatural technology to enhance his own stealth. At that moment, the main character realized that this technique was called pretense. This technique could easily confuse the prey, causing them to mistakenly believe that the killer was their comrade. Therefore, the gift of blood sacrifice does not correspond to the value of the soul of the killer in sheep's clothing, because he was originally an unusual possessor of paranormal powers. Thus, Sunny Shangri-La explained that the reason for their search for the killer in sheep's clothing was to find some connection with a mysterious organization. Understanding what was going on here, the hero assumed that Hasegawa had psychic powers because they could find out something about the killer even if he was already dead. This also turned out to be true. Their knowledge was mainly based on Hasegawa's vision ability. Having learned this, Haster Lovecraft still wanted to understand what their motives were and why they needed to find this mysterious organization. This question irritated Hasegawa because they had agreed to ask one question each. The protagonist looked his offended interlocutor in the eyes to calm him down. Feeling Haster Lovecraft's gaze, Hasegawa felt very awkward and remained silent. After this, the hero decided to ask his question. Why are they pursuing a mysterious organization? The girl's motive was simple. During her daily work of setting up networks and collecting information, she accidentally entered the territory of a mysterious organization. They didn't want anyone to know about their existence. So the members of the organization immediately set out to eliminate Sunny Shangri-La. Hasegawa also decided to reveal that he had helped Adam fight off his pursuers, thus beginning their collaboration. The reason for his feud with the mysterious organization was simple. and that was that they kidnapped his sister for the purpose of experiments. Pastor Lovecraft immediately became interested in his sister's fate, wanted to find out whether she had really been kidnapped by those with supernatural powers. The mysterious guy did not want to reveal this information, considering it too long a story for their meeting. At the end of the dialogue, the girl decided to find out something about the man in sheep's clothing. The young man nevertheless said that he got rid of the killer's body in sheepskin. Although he could not give them his body, he offered to join their activities and help them. This statement was shocking to those present, and they sought to understand the motives of the faceless one. Su Fu became interested in a drug that could turn an ordinary person into a possessor of supernatural powers. Not understanding the young man, the girl asked again whether he really wanted to become the owner of supernatural powers. But this time they received no answer, as the hero refused to divulge the details. However, Adam realized that the drug was not perfect and its side effects could be enormous. Su Fu understood that the drug might have already been developed to the final stage. Sometime later, events continued to develop in the city. As he walked among the people, the young man thought about his previous meeting with Adam and Hasegawa and their reluctant cooperation due to his facelessness. But both of them remained suspicious, except for the supernatural power user and psychic Hasegawa. Adam seemed fragile and weak, which made her more dangerous and required caution. This girl was the initiator of many conflicts between gangs. Nor can one ignore the fact that everyone who ever collaborated with her soon encountered misfortune. During the time he was acquiring information from her about the killer in sheep's clothing, it could be said that she had not yet realized the connection between the mysterious organization and the killer. This girl is just trading a wide range of information. Based on the protagonist's experience, if she had started to carefully track the killer in sheep's clothing in advance, everything could have turned out differently. So the guy couldn't understand why she still hadn't left the building and whether she had noticed that he was following her. From here, the guy assumed that the girl had escaped through the window of the women's restroom. Sometime later, a girl with a different hair color and ears on her head appeared. When the guy saw her, he realized that if she changed her clothes, no one would recognize her. However, Su Fu was a skilled master of disguise and had excellent martial arts skills. By his height, weight, body proportions, walking style, and even breathing rate, the hero could confidently identify Adam among other girls. As soon as Adam left, our hero decided to call someone to find out information about the girl. The old friend immediately thought that the main character intended to kill someone, but in fact he just wanted to find out information about the person. Since they had known each other for a long time, the friend agreed to help him. And yet even friends must receive compensation for their work, so payment cannot be delayed. The guy repeated that he had been misunderstood and that he wanted to find out information about a mysterious man named Adam. After some time, night fell and the main character returned to his apartment. While preparing food in the kitchen, his father called to say that he had a lot of work at the office today and would not be back for dinner. Although the guy had already decided that he would investigate the mysterious organization together with Adam and Hasegawa. But if there are no clues, then there is no point in wasting a lot of effort. The only clue to the killer in sheep's clothing had already been destroyed, and the body had been thrown out of this world. A new clue wouldn't appear on its own, so the protagonist thought about what he would do if he were Adam or Hasegawa. As Su Fu continued to ponder, he wondered where to begin his search. Not knowing each other well enough to trust, they will not give up their search for traces of the killer in sheep's clothing. Whether it's the information provider Adam or the psychic Hasegawa, they're both professionals in gathering information. Once they find the protagonist instead of the sacrifice, there's a high chance that they will be affected by the incredible power of the distortion. After this, the main character decided to stop his new comrades and was going to call Adam, but the girl got ahead of him. As it turned out, she called to tell Su Fu that Hasegawa had gone crazy. Sometime later, events unfolded in the hospital, where a guy and a girl approached the room where Hasegawa was located. The couple was stunned by what they saw. In front of them stood a distraught Hasegawa, very angry at the whole world and not wanting to communicate with the nurse. Out of rage, the owner of supernatural power began to scream at the top of his lungs. The scream greatly frightened the medical staff, and they immediately left the room. The girl was deeply upset by this turn of events, seeing that their partner no longer wanted to contact. The hero realized what was happening and reminded them that he had warned them not to look for the body of the killer in sheep's clothing. Hearing this, the girl only smiled and said that it was a long story and she did not want to explain why they continued searching. Upon entering the office, Adam immediately greeted her partner, announcing that it was her. However, Hasegawa did not react at all, continuing to scream, experiencing anger and madness. When Su Fu entered the room, Hasegawa immediately hid behind the bed. The partner felt very afraid and kept watching the guy who was standing behind the girl. Adam immediately realized that the problem was with the main character and Hasegawa was afraid of him. Looking at the crazy guy, Su-fu realized that he probably saw something when he was looking for the murderer's body, something that shouldn't have been seen, and he probably recognized the face of the real criminal as his own face. The worried girl immediately noticed that Hasegawa was afraid of Su-fu and told him about it, but the guy only replied that he had always been afraid of him. He insisted that he was right, claiming that he had warned them to stop searching for the body of the killer in sheep's clothing, but Hasegawa had disobeyed and gone against his instructions. The girl couldn't tell the whole story in a few words, so they decided to talk outside. As it turned out, Su-fu was right, because they really hoped that searching for the body of the killer in sheep's clothing would yield results. For them, this was the only way to track down this mysterious organization. Even if there was no body, there were likely traces or items left behind that could help pinpoint his location before death, Hasegawa believed. This was enough for the seer to determine its location. The faceless man did not give a reason for his refusal to reveal the location of the body, and Hasegawa could not trust him because of his uncooperative attitude. Adam guessed that, although he hadn't wanted to say, it had been 2 hours at most since the faceless man had gone looking for the killer in sheep's clothing and killed him. Therefore, he probably found the killer at the address she was given and killed him there. The girl also wanted to know what happened yesterday, when Hasegawa and the faceless man stood opposite each other, because Hasegawa had a strange expression on his face, as if he sensed something. To this question, Hasegawa replied that the faceless man was a very frightening person, and he felt that he could read all his movements. Just as Hasegawa was about to hit him, he thought he saw a vision of his leg being broken. And whatever he did at that moment, he would have been seriously injured. The girl understood that Hasegawa had a keen instinct, and yet the faceless one could read all his future actions. The guy's intuition was enough to predict his opponent's next move, but it seemed that he had extensive combat experience, allowing him to read his opponent's next moves. Thus, Hasegawa had no advantage over the protagonist. They realized that the faceless one was even more terrible than they thought. It turned out that Hasegawa felt that in the presence of the protagonist, he was as if thinned by air, and he simply dissolved into it. He is probably a martial artist and can hide his presence, or he is just an ordinary person with no supernatural powers. From an intuitive point of view, his presence is very different from that of those with supernatural powers, so he can easily go unnoticed. Adam knew that many of the supernaturals he had killed were masters of their craft, but in his case there was no sign of supernatural power, although there are many suspicions regarding the faceless one. If he was hostile to them, they would already be dead, given his strength. As for the killer's body in sheep's clothing, if the faceless one wanted to deceive them, he wouldn't say something so unprovable and unconvincing. The faceless one would not want to present themselves to someone untrustworthy, and their decision to search for the killer's body was probably unfounded. Still, Adam decided to look for the body and ask for permission to conduct the investigation alone, considering that she had permission and could avoid complications. Suddenly, Hasegawa announced that he would go with her, but in case of an emergency, she should stay 500 meters away. But as soon as he said that, his eyes became cloudy and a dark aura came over him. Hasegawa's consciousness began to cloud, and he fell to the ground, unable to move normally, only twitching convulsively. Seeing this, the girl began to panic, not understanding what was happening to her partner. At the same time, Hasegawa felt as if he was being consumed by dark entities that were trying to strangle him. Screaming in pain, he tried to get out of this trap, but he couldn't because everything was happening only in his own imagination. There were many monsters around him, although in reality, it was just a figment of his imagination. The hellish creatures were performing some kind of unknown ritual because one of them was holding a magic book in his hands and reading an incomprehensible spell. Immediately after using the spell, Hasegawa lost his mind, his pupils turned white, and he began to tremble in fear. The hero was interested in how far away the street was where Hasegawa lost his mind and fainted. In fact, this street was 5.5 kilometers from where they were heading. The partner also recalled how the faceless man spoke about the special treatment he had given the killer in sheep's clothing. It's likely that in that case, whatever is left in the bag has too much of an effect after processing. Thus, Hasegawa, who was 5.5 kilometers away, was able to obtain information on his own and then lost his mind. So the hero was worried and told them to stop searching for the body. Suddenly, a loud scream came from the hospital, and Adam realized it was Hasegawa. It was true. Their partner fell to the floor and started acting strange again. At first, Hasegawa started banging his head on the floor with all his might, and everyone immediately realized that he was crazy. Approaching her partner, the girl literally begged him to stop. Adam also asked him to collect his thoughts and remember his sister. The boy stopped for a few seconds, remembering his sister, whom he loved so much. Watching all this, Su-fu exclaimed for the girl to be careful. In an instant, Hasegawa's expression changed, and, opening his mouth, he was about to bite the first person he met on the way. His partner turned out to be a girl, and he was about to bite her right on the neck. After this, the alarmed girl immediately retreated several meters to the side to avoid being bitten again. However, unfortunately, she was still attacked and bitten right on the neck. Turning around, the hero felt that someone nearby was casting a spell. It turned out to be evidence of division, which took the form of an ordinary map. All this meant that even an ordinary person could use such a rare thing as this spell. Meanwhile, Hasegawa began to shout again in anger and fury. Without hesitation, Su-fu took action and kicked the scoundrel hard in the face to prevent his attack. Continuing to observe his opponent, the hero noticed that he had armor made of supernatural power. In fact, this armor did not provide reliable protection, since the young man was able to stop his opponent with the first blow. The villain immediately flew several dozen meters to the side, experiencing acute pain. The blow was truly powerful, and after it was delivered, Hasegawa literally crashed into the wall, unable to move. The girl, looking at her former partner, was worried about his condition. Everything was fine, except for the damage to the body, which required several days to recover. The young man had fought many supernatural beings in the past and knew that such injuries would be fatal to ordinary people. For someone with supernatural powers, it only took a little longer to recover. As the recovery process began, Hasegawa began to change his appearance. His skin seemed to tighten, changing his appearance. Adam felt stressed watching this. Hasegawa's forces were out of control, and the demonization process began. The supernatural force had an illusory effect on the real world, and the person began to forget his former essence. The opponent's body recovered in a matter of seconds, and Hasegawa anticipated his opponent's next move. The opponent also had tremendous strength and could predict many of the next moves, posing a serious threat. The main character easily defeated the demon, dealing him many blows. This outcome of the battle further enraged the demon, who sought to do everything possible to win. The demonic creature continued to attack, rushing towards its target with incredible speed. The hero, looking at the enemy, understood that the situation was not so simple and prepared to attack. Hasegawa eventually decided to leave the hospital and jumped out of the window. Thus, the mutant found himself on the street and continued to move forward without problems. The hero also decided to jump to catch up with the enemy. While fighting Hasegawa, Su-fu realized that he had foreseen the end of the battle and chose the path of escape. A few minutes later, Adam also went outside to watch the outcome of the battle. However, as the girl approached, she realized that Hasegawa was not nearby. Realizing that this battle was not easy to win, the guy declared that it was time for the enemy to leave. After all, it was the faceless one who killed the killer in sheep's clothing, and Hasegawa's madness seems to be connected to the protagonist. Although he offered to join them and help them investigate the mysterious organization, he ultimately abandoned the idea. Laughing, the girl suggested that the faceless man could be a secret spy of a mysterious organization who had been drawn into their ranks. However, Adam understood that it was just a joke and asked the guy not to worry because she always believed in her decisions. Their eyes met, and the girl said that she believed that the faceless one had good intentions and was their ally. In response, the guy expressed hope that she would never regret her decision. Now, they need to think hard and come up with a plan of action to get Hasegawa back to his old life. Unfortunately, at this point they did not have a ready plan and could only start with the information gathering stage. Looking at his partner, the hero decided to ask if she needed help. Adam didn't need help because she thought her partner thought she was incapable of handling it. Meanwhile, hospital staff began rushing towards the people who were causing a disturbance in the hospital ward. Luckily, there was a car nearby and the girl knew how to drive, so it was clear to them that it was time to leave. So they stole an ambulance to get out of the place faster. As she left the crime scene, the girl still wanted to understand what led to Hasegawa's demonization, but she couldn't understand it. The hero explained that every possessor of supernatural power, when using it, relies on the vision of his mind, or, one might say, on his imagination. And if Su-fu were a psychic who controlled gravity, he would see her constantly swinging in his imagination under the influence of gravity. But the girl still couldn't understand what was so terrible that Hasegawa saw that he turned into a demon. It was like he was watching a movie and asking not to reveal the plot twists. Ultimately, they needed to deal with this residual phenomenon in order to save other supernatural power users from being demonized. For the guy, it was simple, since he was going to perform a ritual of isolating the space and enclose this residual phenomenon. He also knew that if the girl wanted to know everything about the killer, there was a piece of a very smelly substance nearby. The proposal was repulsive, and she immediately understood what the faceless man was talking about when he mentioned this strange substance. At that time, the protagonist received a notification on his mobile phone from a friend about the underground informant Adam. Without thinking, Su-Fu decided to look at the information sent. It was indeed information about this girl. Her real name was Chloe DiCaprio. She worked for the best-selling newspaper in the city of Haley and was a professional reporter. There was also a short biography, and she graduated from a prestigious university with a degree in journalism and started her career in entertainment through her own efforts and family experience, and she was currently collecting all the information about the killer in sheep's clothing. The girl asked with interest what Su-Fu was studying so carefully on his phone. In any case, the hero was not going to answer her question and ordered them to continue moving, since they were almost there. They soon reached the place where the fight took place between the main character and the killer, who was hiding under the mask of sheepskin. Chloe DiCaprio felt a strange sensation, wondering why the boy did not experience it as intensely, and it soon became clear that his ability to perceive the force was developing more slowly than that of an ordinary person. The lady herself felt as if he was not careful, he would end up in water. Looking at Adam, Su-Fu asked her to go back to the car and wait for him there. The brave girl decided not to listen to the young man's advice and declared that she would go with him. Walking along a narrow street, the hero told about how it was here that the killer in sheep's clothing was killed. Turning around, the guy saw the girl slowly disappear into a strange portal that opened nearby. The alarmed young man immediately pushed her away so that she would not fall into this incomprehensible portal. Touching the wall, the hero realized that it was probably not real. At first glance, it was difficult to understand what was happening and why the wall had turned into a portal to somewhere unknown. Noticing that the girl's sneaker was covered in some strange substance, Su-Fu decided not to let her get it dirty. After asking the girl to stay put, he quickly took off her sneakers and threw them away to prevent contamination. The substance absorbed all the sneakers that Chloe DiCaprio was wearing. All this time, the lady could not understand what was happening and why the hero was behaving so strangely. It seemed to the hero that Adam was gradually losing his mind under the influence of something unknown, and he decided to take her away so that she would be safe. So he decided to take her a little to the side so that she would not suffer from the actions of the villains. After this, Su-Fu asked the girl to stay where she was until he returned. The girl immediately asked him what he meant, and it became clear that she was also in a state of shock. Realizing that there was nothing she could do now, Su-Fu decided to move on and use his powers against his opponents. First, the hero used the soul brush to summon a magical portal. The soul brush cost a lot of money, as it was bought from a merchant in a danger zone. It allowed for the replacement of most ritual materials and was portable and durable. Strange creatures began to appear nearby, approaching the main character. This caused him great anxiety, as he had not expected such an approach. There were many ghosts in the air due to the ritual that had begun. With a sigh of relief, Su-Fu realized that the ritual was complete and hoped that it would work. The partner came to and was surprised to find that her sneakers were missing. She turned to the hero to find out what happened and why she was without shoes. Fortunately, the ritual was successful and her mind became clearer. Sometime later, the girl realized that she had almost crashed into the wall at the end of the alley. Feeling sorry for the injured girl, Su-Fu offered her his shoes. The girl was shocked by such a kind gesture, realizing that Su-Fu would be uncomfortable without shoes. Realizing that the girl did not want to take his shoes, he said that he would not give them back then. Not understanding the reason for her upset, Su-Fu asked what happened. The girl continued to look at him silently, hoping that he would understand his mistake. She was very curious to know what would happen if she crashed into a wall. Su-Fu didn't know the answer to this question, but he assumed that part of her body would be inside the wall and part outside. Perhaps she could have ended up in another space or even died. Looking at her partner, Adam realized that he had dealt with the residual phenomenon. It was hard to tell what he did with the phenomenon, but it seemed he sealed it at the end of the alley. In an instant, the girl's expression changed as she realized how dangerous it would be if someone were to enter there and be exposed to dark magic. Without hesitation, the young man admitted that this was indeed the case. Therefore, they need to start the second part of the task as soon as possible. After unlocking the truck, Su-Fu was ready to take action, as he had already devised a plan to avoid the deaths of the rest of the people. Using the materials he had in the truck, he planned to build a wall to seal off the magical seals he had created. A few minutes later, they changed their clothes and began building the wall, and the girl was unhappy that she had to resort to such a method of correcting the situation. In fact, if they just wanted to prevent ordinary people from entering this alley, the hero could have spent a little time performing a small ritual around the entrance. At the same time, a person entering here would immediately feel discomfort and would prefer to stay away. But in this world, there will always be people who, seeing something strange and unusual, on the contrary, will be attracted to it, And besides, some people have extrasensory abilities and will immediately understand that some kind of ritual is taking place here. Given their curiosity, they will enter here to see what is going on, and as a result, they will never be able to leave this place again. And so it is best to use this standard method. Suddenly, the protagonist received a message from a friend, asking if he was satisfied with Adam's real identity, and who would have thought that behind Adam there was a beautiful young girl. Su-Fu knew that she had already graduated from university, so she couldn't be called a young girl, and yet her appearance and physical form were just like a young girl's, making her seem forever young. Furthermore, the comrade believed that she was suitable for Su-Fu as a match based on this information. Suddenly, the girl started screaming, demanding that the young man quickly build the wall, since she wanted to get home as soon as possible, take a bath, and in general, late sleep was bad for her skin. Adam couldn't even imagine that the day would come when she would help a man build a wall. At this time, she was already going to bed, and so she really wanted to sleep. After that, they continued building the wall, as the day had been hard and each of them wanted to rest. After some time, the wall was ready and all the bricks were used. Tired from the hard work, Su-Fu and his partner were very pleased that the wall turned out really well. Suddenly, nearby, the hero noticed that there was something strange in the box. It was an invisible creature that only he could see, and it was approaching the lady. A huge ghost was approaching the girl and was literally trying to eat her, but she didn't see it at all and asked if she should drive. The guy started to panic because he thought that all this was really happening. In fact, it was just an illusion, and it seemed to him that it was really happening. As soon as they started driving away from the place, the girl exclaimed that today she felt like a slave as she was driving a car and building a wall. The next morning, the events continued at the main character's house, where he prepared himself a delicious breakfast. While reading the news, Su-Fu saw that before dawn in the Eastern District, a person with supernatural powers had harmed a person. According to the information about the attack, it happened at 4 a.m. The attacker is a registered psychic Hasegawa. The victim of the attack was a technical advisor to a drug company in the city of Halley. Police said the attack may be linked to recent missing persons cases, and the morning news reminded people to stay out at night and reduce unnecessary travel at night. After leaving breakfast, Su-Fu immediately started calling Adam to meet. A few hours later, they gathered in a restaurant, discussing a possible secret Hasegawa had that he seemed to be hiding from them, and perhaps he had already figured out the mysterious organization, but for some reason was not sharing the information. The hero immediately thought that the drug manufacturing company Haley could be this mysterious organization. After all, the young man had a video clip with Hasegawa, where he was clearly interested in the activities of this secret organization. In an attempt to interrogate him, Hasegawa wanted to know how many people were harmed by their medicines and who gave him the recipe to produce them. After seeing the video, the girl immediately realized that if this mysterious organization was really connected to the company, the investigation would be easier. Given Hasegawa's statements, her partner was curious to know who was behind all of this and why they needed to turn people into superhumans. Suddenly, the girl took out an envelope and said that if Su-Fu really thought so, then he should look at the contents first. The envelope contained a dossier on Naoto Inoue, a 23-year-old man whose father is the chairman of a drug maker in Hale and whose mother, Mitsuka Inoue, is in a vegetative state after an accident 5 years ago. Naoto is one of the top students in the finance department of Hede University, and after graduating, he joined his father's company, but he suddenly disappeared a week ago. Looking at the photograph, the hero began to understand that this is not to mention the shape of the head and the width of the shoulders. Hasegawa and this guy had thick necks and similar skin color, which made one think that this guy was Naoto. After his sister was kidnapped by the mysterious organization, he began his activities. However, from the information, he was the only son without a sister, which made Su-Fu wonder what else Hasegawa could tell him. This afternoon, the girl decided to infiltrate the pharmaceutical company Haley and conduct a preliminary investigation using the power of the separation evidence. Inside, they found an isolated room that was restricted to supernatural forces, and this room was inaccessible to their doppelgangers, preventing them from entering. The mysterious organization knew about the evidence of division in Adam and used it as a precaution. To avoid possible infiltration and theft of important materials, they tried to prevent their true location from being found. The girl discovered that the room was built long ago to protect against supernatural forces. The goal was clear, to prevent outside forces from entering, and yet the important information was inside, and access to the room could only be gained by verifying the fingerprints of superiors. The young man became interested in the possibility of getting inside the room. The girl has already obtained the fingerprints of the right person on the glove using a high-precision machine. The events took place after sunset, near a pharmaceutical company. The protagonist and the girl planned to sneak inside together, and to prevent problems, Adam had to sneak inside first, and then the protagonist planned to join her. The girl easily moved inside the company using her abilities. The guy decided to use parkour to get through the gate. Security guards walked around him, checking the area for strangers. One of the guards suddenly fell down because Su Fu incapacitated him in a matter of seconds. The security guard was in shock, not understanding what was happening and who was on the premises. The magic shield reliably protected against the Faceless One's attack. The protagonist had to retreat to avoid causing serious damage to the guard through his armor. Despite the circumstances, the task needed to be completed, and Su Fu continued his attack persistently. He hit the stranger hard, but he blocked the blow using both hands. The blow was so powerful that the guard was thrown back several dozen meters and fell to the ground. Suddenly a voice came over the radio, demanding that the guard provide a report. The man was dying and could not answer because Su Fu did not give him the opportunity. Suddenly the hero decided to let the guy go so that he could answer the challenge. The guard reported that the fifth group was fine, nothing unusual. After the conversation ended, the man thought that perhaps he should not have spoken. The mask on the protagonist's face seemed very familiar. In the city of Halley, only one person is capable of injuring another through supernatural armor with his bare hands. An ordinary person attacked a psychic, and the man immediately realized who was in front of him. Su Fu realized that this was an unusual person and decided to find out his identity, and it turned out that he really was not a local security guard. The man in front of him turned out to be a police officer who was on the premises of a pharmaceutical company. The hero could not understand why the policeman pretended to be a security guard at the Haley Pharmaceutical Company and hid his true intentions. It turned out that the policeman supported the faceless man and understood why he had entered the organization's territory. Although this statement seemed strange to the protagonist, it did not surprise him. It all started with why he became the enemy of all criminals with supernatural powers in the city of Halley. While studying the path to becoming a psychic, the hero found a way to use the blood of other psychics to create an elixir without killing them. The Faceless preferred not to kill psychics who lived honest lives. If I had to choose, it would be better to destroy the psychics of the criminal world with their hands stained with blood. Following all this covert activity, the Faceless man became known in the criminal underworld of the city of Halley. The hero, as if returned from the dead, became a volunteer policeman of this city, a secret protector fighting criminal organizations outside the law, a punisher who lost faith in the government. Naturally, both his supporters and opponents appeared. The policeman was shocked because it had been a year since the Faceless man disappeared, and everyone thought he was dead. But the good man believed that he was healing his wounds somewhere and would return soon, and he was still interested in why the Faceless one was trying to infiltrate this company and what was going on there. At first, the hero wanted to figure out why they pretend to be security guards when they are actually police officers. Everything turned out to be simple, and during the day, one crazy psychic attacked a technical consultant for the pharmaceutical company Haley right on the street. Their commander suspects that this crazy psychic could cause damage to the company. He discussed this with the company's top management and gathered some of the best fighters. He then ordered the public order guards to arrest the man if he appeared near the company. Still, the guy decided to find out how many of them had come here in total, and it turned out that there were 9 people from the police, and he was also interested in the name of their commander. The commander's name was Su Xingxing, and it was he who brought a whole 9 policemen here to ensure the protection of the company's territory. Suddenly, the guy hit the policeman hard, making him lose consciousness, and he didn't like hearing that name in such a situation. However, he thanked the good-natured man for the loan of clothes. Upon entering the building, his partner said it was not time for a shift yet, but the guy replied that he was just going to the toilet. The policeman didn't understand why he couldn't go into the grass, but the guy knew it could put them in an awkward position in front of their superiors. The partner didn't suspect anything. He simply asked to return quickly so as not to fall under Su Xingxing's wrath. This did not pose any problems for the guy, and he continued moving around the company's territory. Suddenly, an armed girl appeared in front of him, threatening him. It turned out that it was his partner, who was already inside the building. The girl couldn't believe that he had gotten in so easily, and she thought that something had happened to him. The guy explained that he had been gathering information and had learned that 9 police psychics were hiding in the area under the cover of security guards. If this is true, then their commander, Su Xingxing, is a top psychic, and she can only fight, risking her life. The guy was surprised by this statement, and he did not understand how one could fight psychics with a gun. The girl laughed at his suggestion, and she planned to use more than just the gun, as she had spent most of the money on one thing. She acquired special bullets that penetrate the soul, and these are special bullets that can penetrate the armor of psychics. So she not only ran away, but was also ready to resist. While these bullets are ineffective against higher psychics, they can work against first-class ones, but they will be difficult to deal with. The guy realized that it would not be easy to win such a battle. Suddenly, she pointed the gun at him and said that she would fight to the end without retreating. She warned that anyone who dared to kill her, she would kill in return. But Su-fu didn't show any reaction to this statement, and the girl didn't understand why he didn't express admiration. And for him, such words were self-evident. The girl was greatly influenced by the protagonist's reaction, and she became bored, and she invited him to go with her, since she knew where the storage was. Together, they began to make their way through a huge number of guards to reach their goal. Upon arriving at the vault, they first had to open the door, and the faceless one had to perform a ritual to prevent others from invading. Su-fu began to draw a seal for the ceremony. At this time, Adam was trying to hack the digital code and the fingerprint scanner. A few seconds later, the door opened, and they went inside to see what was there. As they entered the vault, the door closed behind them, and they realized they were trapped. They were no longer able to leave the vault when suddenly the lights came on, and they were discovered. There were two more people standing in front of the partners, and their intentions remained unknown. Having glanced at the new arrivals, the girl concluded that they were unusual. The strangers began to interrogate the main character and the girl about who they really were. Su-fu saw no point in asking such questions. If they discovered the room's peculiarity and unlocked the biometric lock, then they may be psychics, but since they cracked the lock using a fingerprint, they may be thieves interested in the secret of the Halley City drug. The defenders of the vault saw no point in showing leniency and prepared to kill the two strangers who had entered here. The villain's partner asked him to act carefully so as not to attract attention, and although the walls of the room were soundproof, his method of fighting was too rough. Suddenly, the hero exclaimed that security reports on the situation every 30 minutes. They had about 15 minutes left before the fight started. The girl noted that if he had not stunned his allies, they would have had more time. Watching the thieves break in, the boy doubted their chances of success. They were in a supernatural magic field created using the soul protection technique. Concerned, Adam asked Su-fu about the nature of this field, which turned out to be a magical optical illusion field. This field could deprive a psychic who entered its zone of the sense of his own spiritual energy, depriving him of the ability to use his supernatural power. Taking out a gun, the girl noted that this was a necessary measure in such a situation. Despite this, she could not accept the fact that they were trapped and decided to open fire. Several bullets flew past the villains, who easily dodged them. The unusual bullets hit the seal on the floor, creating a trap. Thinking that these were ordinary bullets, the villains attacked and rushed towards the enemies standing to the side. Using his skills, the boy easily dodged the attack of the man who approached him. The girl was also going to attack, but she was unable to do so, since her opponent had the ability to teleport. Seeing this, the villain immediately realized that her opponent had the ability to split souls. So the fight continued, and Adam had a huge advantage, since she could teleport to any point in the location, while the confrontation between the protagonist and his opponent continued. Using his supernatural powers, the vault guard summoned giant fists to destroy Su-fu. Fortunately, the protagonist's agility was higher than that of the attacker, and he easily dodged the incredibly powerful attack. The enemy immediately noticed that this was good, but he was limited by the soul defense technique, although he could still dodge his attacks. At the same time, his partner shouted at him to be quiet, but he didn't listen to her and began to use an attack, destroying the area around him. Immediately after this, a multitude of blows followed, and a magical technique was used that allowed the enemy to deliver several dozen blows per second. However, the attacks were useless because he couldn't use his power in this magical field. Using his physical strength, Su-fu powerfully struck his opponent, sending him flying several dozen meters away due to the force of the blow. Feeling the sharp pain, the villain did not expect such strong resistance from an ordinary person. Only through a combined attack was Su-fu able to defeat his opponent, preventing him from attacking again. At the same time, his partner also defeated the villain who tried to interfere with their plan. Thanks to the quick end of the fight, Su-fu managed to report to the guards that everything was under control and there was no reason to worry. Watching the girl, the hero decided to clarify whether her testimony of the division of the soul was capable of creating illusions. Indeed, it was possible, but she did not want to reveal all her cards because she trusted Adam. However, he did not trust her, a traitor who betrayed her partner. If Su-fu remembers his past experience at a critical moment, he may feel distrustful of Adam, who he does not trust. In case of disagreement, she should have a backup plan that can be used at any time. Although Su-fu thought about it, she had already used her spare card in front of him. If there is disagreement between the parties during the battle, even to the point where it could lead to negative consequences, it will indeed become a problem for the protagonist. However, the girl realized that he could not know if she had another card up her sleeve. Right now, they should be concentrating on how to get out of this huge safe. There was a combination lock nearby, and Adam immediately knew they needed to find the key card. The hero began to search the bodies because if they were ordered to set up an ambush here, then they should definitely have a key. When searching the bodies, only a few strange objects were found. Laughing, the girl even thought that he had found war trophies, but not the key. While searching the boy's body, Adam found a key card and a strange stone. Suddenly the alarm sounded, and it was clear that they had been discovered. In the midst of the loud noise, they were quickly discovered. The clever guy asked the girl to leave while he tried to get past the security and get out of there, after which they agreed to meet at the same place. Sometime later, the guy was looking for a way out along the dark corridor of the factory, hoping to find it. Suddenly, someone nearby asked him what he was doing here, since there shouldn't be a patrol on this floor. A little confused, the guy explained that his friend said he was going to the toilet, but never came back. Hearing this, the man became indignant, as this argument sounded suspicious, considering that they were on the 4th floor. Su-Fu realized that talking to this person would not be easy and he had to act carefully. So he told the guard that he had searched the first 3 floors but had not found him there. The guard was told that no one had left the building, so he went up to the 4th floor to look for him. Their eyes met, and they continued to look at each other intently. However, the man admitted that in fact, when he first got up, he told the security guard at the entrance that someone had gone to the toilet and had not returned for a long time, suspecting that someone was skipping work. The skilled investigator thought that Dennis was shirking his work. He asked his subordinate to return, and upon his return, he would also be scolded for ignoring the order. So the guy started to leave because the alarm went off and the investigator was going to deal with it alone, but he was ordered to go to another place and continue the search. Suddenly, the main character felt unbearable pain, as if something next to him began to burn. Indeed, there was an explosion of enormous proportions right behind the guy. None of the police officers could understand what had happened or why there was such a powerful explosion. The investigator believed that the criminal was indeed a cunning and quick-reacting thief. Su-Fu realized that the old man had given Denny instructions to check him. He assumed that this was the man who had attacked the technical consultant for the drug production of the city of Halley before dawn and ordered him to surrender or avoid being burned. In the guy's opinion, it sounded pretty friendly, but there was still the question of what happened to the fireball earlier. The old man couldn't believe that his opponent had supernatural armor and that the fireball could cause him serious damage, but his fear seemed unfounded. So the guy decided to confess that he was not really the one who attacked the man before dawn. The experienced investigator still wanted to know who was standing in front of him now. Without thinking too long, he realized that the faceless one was standing in front of him. The man even began to assume that the faceless one had already left the city of Halley, and if he was so eager for fame, then why didn't he call himself an expert in combat missions from the Demon Taming Bureau? And if he decided to leave, then the investigator was going to help him voluntarily, because he loved to do good. The angry boy shouted at the man not to force him to kill and not to do something stupid. The boy's father thought that if the real, faceless man had said this, he would have had to use all his strength and be on guard. Otherwise, he could have been killed. Immediately after this, the investigator used his magical powers to attack the guy and find out who he really is. The guy had to dodge and block the spells with all his might. The father continued to fight stubbornly, shouting that the so-called faceless one should not think of running away from him. A series of explosions wounded the protagonist, and with each passing minute, it became increasingly difficult for him to dodge the magic. The young man realized that when using his strength, each person loses a huge amount of energy in the process of transferring it to the muscles and bones. Even if you're a martial artist and have full body coordination, this loss of energy cannot be avoided entirely, since the martial artist consciously uses more muscles during his movement. Therefore, despite the promising result in increasing strength, there's an unjustified expenditure of energy. However, most energy losses can be avoided. By optimizing the power transmission chain, it can be made extremely efficient. By using all one's abilities, one can achieve the impossible, which is why Su-Fu began to counterattack despite all the difficulties. Although it was very difficult for him, he continued to fight against his father to show his true self. Feeling a raging rage as he hit his father, the son remembered how his father always told him that he was busy with work and could not spend time with him. Because of this, Su-Fu wanted to help his father by giving him the opportunity to rest at home and take sick leave. He did not expect any gratitude from his father, since he himself loved to do good deeds. The blow to the investigator was so powerful that he was literally driven into the wall, and he admitted that it was a good blow. The man realized that if he couldn't turn into fire, it could cost him his life, and the guy who could do that really was faceless. A few seconds later, the man turned into a fiery creature and began to attack the main character. His attacks were incredibly strong and powerful, as they were carried out using fire magic. In the end, the investigator wanted to know who needed the services of the faceless man in the pharmaceutical company, and Su-Fu admitted that there was something wrong with this company, and he came to investigate. Dodging the blow, the guy wanted to ask why their squad dressed up as security guards and pretended to be company employees. Continuing the battle, The investigator exclaimed that now was not the time to question the faceless one. There were indeed people in their bureau who, thanks to his early successful cases, brought benefit to the city. Everyone said that the faceless man was an avenger or a punisher, even some kind of hero, but the investigator did not consider him as such. During the fight, the man saw that there was no dignity or sense of justice in his soul. He was driven only by personal goals, which is why he used his supernatural powers against criminals. This made the hero even more angry, and he hit the investigator hard for his words. The investigator was able to easily dodge and ask the young man if he was really fighting criminals because of the remaining humanity in himself, although it was unknown how long this humanity would last him. The policeman said that he cannot trust people like the faceless one. His essence is wrong, and sooner or later it will come to light. The hero again asked if he would be given an answer, since he had information that could be useful. The man might not trust him, but that doesn't stop them from working together because they both don't like something and they came here. His father admitted that he was there because of a missing persons investigation that had nothing to do with the killer in sheep's clothing. This pharmaceutical company is suspicious, and they play security guard while conducting their own investigation. Now it was time for the protagonist to speak his mind, and the man asked him what he was doing here, and the guy explained that it was a pharmaceutical company that was probably using kidnapped people for dangerous experiments. Suddenly, the police called their superior, reporting an emergency. Because of this, the investigator announced that now was not the time for talking and asked the young man to leave his number, and when the time came, he planned to contact him. The hero thought, and if he leaves his number and the investigator calls him at home, the call may be heard by one of his household members, which will immediately lead to his discovery. In response, the faceless man said that he would contact the investigator tomorrow and asked him to just wait. Immediately after this, he climbed out of the window to quickly leave this place. Sometime later, the faceless man told Adam everything, but she was afraid that the investigator was just using him, and she couldn't believe that he was actually going to cooperate with Su Shengxing. Considering that the headquarters of Haley's pharmaceutical company is guarded as tightly as the White House, and that the room with the important data is no longer valuable, there is no other way to find evidence without outside help. This argument was really convincing, and the girl realized that there was no point in arguing with him. Suddenly, the guy decided to return home, noticing that it was time to leave. Night had fallen, and Su Fu was already at home, washing dishes. When his father returned home, he immediately asked him why he was not sleeping. The son replied that he was simply distracted by his phone and was about to go to bed, and, in fact, his father had returned home due to an unforeseen situation at work. Approaching his father, Su Fu assumed that he, as usual, was chasing a criminal and perhaps accidentally knocked down a couple of buildings on the way. The father was outraged by this joke, declaring that he had done nothing of the sort, and yet the son knew that when his father lied, he clenched his right hand into a fist. However, it was just a joke, but the father was not happy that his son was joking about this topic. The father explained that this time he was not the only one who participated in the destruction of the building, and that the criminal even helped him, but in the end, all the blame was placed on him, and he hopes to catch this scoundrel in the future. When they were having dinner, Su Fu wished his father good luck because the person he wanted to catch was right next to him at home. And not only does he live in the apartment he bought, but he also eats the food he earned. The next day, the event continued, and Su Fu was surprised to find that his father was not at work today. It turned out that he had had a little trouble at work, so he had been given a couple of days off to relax a bit, and now he was going to do something useful, and then they were going to go to the movies together. Suddenly, the guy closed the door and said that it would be better if his father continued working. He sighed heavily and realized that this matter could not be left unattended and that measures had to be taken in any case. So he sent a message to his friend asking him to find a fake number and pass the information to Su Shengxing. An SMS was sent to the man's phone number. The message from an unknown sender included an address they needed to go to. Immediately after this, the father knocked on his son's room and said that he needed to step away for a while, but they could go to the cinema next time. Events continued to unfold in a cafe, where the investigator had previously agreed to meet with a faceless man. Suddenly, an unknown man began to sit down at the table, and the investigator immediately noticed that the place was occupied. However, it turned out that it was the faceless one with whom they had agreed to meet. It was surprising for the guy that the faceless one invited him himself, but was late, and yet the guy did not want underage communication and intended to immediately get down to business, hoping for a joint investigation at the pharmaceutical company Haley. The policeman was surprised by this statement and asked the faceless man if he was afraid that he would change his mind and they would all be caught and sent to prison. This turn of events only pleased Su Fu, and he asked to try, but warned that if he did not catch it, he would bear responsibility himself. Then the hero began to tell that he heard that a man lost his wife early, and he was left with 2 sons, and the younger one was studying abroad, and the older one lived here. That guy is crippled, blind in one eye, an unfortunate guy. This statement greatly angered the man, and he expressed disappointment in the faceless man. And he may not adhere to the law, but he expected him to at least maintain some moral principles and dignity. The lack of advertising was a great pity, but its essence was misunderstood, and sooner or later this will become apparent. The anger grew with each passing second, and the investigator ordered the faceless man not to touch his son, otherwise the consequences would be unpleasant. The investigator threatened to pull him out from under the ground so that he would not remain alive, and his soul would not see either heaven or hell. Suddenly Adam came up to her. She was surprised that they had already become friends. When the girl sat down at the table, she immediately ordered a glass of milk, and everyone was surprised that she knew the investigator. It turned out that she had previously been an informant at the police station, trying to provoke internal conflicts within a criminal group. Instead of just sitting and screaming, they could start searching for the bodies of the missing victims. The officer realized that this was not an easy thing to find and was constantly trying to cope with it. Hearing this, the hero was shocked, not understanding how the officer could not find the body. Finding the bodies proved almost impossible, and all the bodies had disappeared, although the crimes had originally been amateurish, and now, thanks to the detective's skillful work, they were looking at the case from a new angle. They turned the murderer in sheep's clothing into a scapegoat, placing all the blame on him and giving the police the perfect excuse to close the case. The faceless one noticed that they were skillfully playing with the officials, fully aware that their bosses were trying to shift responsibility for the disappearances onto the killer. Although the man did not say it out loud, he himself understood that it was possible. The officials used political maneuvers to force the officer to close the case faster, and the hero even admitted that he had previously underestimated them. Adam also wondered if the officer was hiding something and not telling the whole truth. It turned out that Fedia, the head of the pharmaceutical company Heli, and Jinta Inoue have been friends since their school years. So far, investigators did not suspect him of being untrue and hoped that he would tell them the truth about Jinta Inoue. This conclusion turned out to be correct because the man had information about him, but he did not think it could be useful. The girl insisted on complete frankness, even if he did not see the point in it, and perhaps he could find something meaningful between the lines. Embarrassed, the man sighed heavily, but still agreed to tell what he knew. Upon hearing this, Adam immediately agreed to write everything down in detail so as not to miss anything. At school, Su Xingxing discovered that he had supernatural abilities, but he didn't tell anyone about them. Jinta Inoue, following Shun Xing's hints, realized that he possessed supernatural powers. Eventually, although it started by chance, they became good friends. During his high school years, Jinta encountered a tragic situation, and his father, upon learning of his wife's betrayal, became enraged and, unable to cope with the humiliation, committed a crime for which he is still serving a sentence in prison to this day. And witnessing this terrible act of violence, Jinta was left with an image in his memory as a memory of the terrible incident. Believing in the prophecies, Jinta believed that the marriage between Su Shangxing and Su Fu, Ling Xiaoran, was doomed to failure. Fed up with the constant ridicule, Su Shangxing expressed his hope that somewhere there was a person with unique abilities who could help him create an ideal partner. What came as a surprise was the fact that Jinta Inoue, who despised the idea of marriage, turned out to be the first of his friends to get married. Jinta Inoue, a fair and honest man, originally dreamed of a career in the police, but after failing a political interview, he changed his life trajectory and went to study at a medical university, where he met his future wife Suzuki Hikaru, and despite the fact that they had not yet graduated, they decided to get married. After graduating from university, Jinta began working at a local hospital, but due to conflicts at work, he decided to change his field of activity and went into the drug trade, and his enterprise, Halley, grew from a small business into a large pharmaceutical company. They had a son, Naoto, in their marriage and enjoyed the happiness of family life. However, their happiness was threatened when Hikaru accidentally read a book containing forbidden knowledge 3 years ago. She fell into a coma and was taken to hospital, but has not yet regained consciousness. Upon hearing this, Jinta was shocked that a book with forbidden knowledge had caused a disaster, and the official version was that Hikaru had been in a coma due to a car accident, which was confusing. According to the investigator, the situation boiled down to the fact that forbidden knowledge led to hallucinations, which was the cause of their accident. While driving, Suzuki Hikaru suffered a sudden attack, which led to the accident. The policeman could not give precise information about what exactly the forbidden knowledge was. After writing this down, Adam came to the conclusion that perhaps this forbidden knowledge was somehow related to a drug that could activate supernatural abilities. The protagonist also thought about this, as he suspected the existence of a secret organization that was experimenting on people in order to turn an ordinary person into a superpowered person. This seemed like a possible motive, and Jinta, in no way, wanted to transform into a superpowered person to create an ideal partner. After the incident, the police conducted a thorough search to prevent access to the forbidden knowledge, and it is safe to say that Suzuki Hikaru was the only person who read this knowledge, and no secret organization had access to it. The only way anyone else could know the content of the forbidden knowledge is if a medium could penetrate her subconscious and extract the information from there by force. In other words, only a medium could have done this, since the woman herself could not tell anything due to her vegetative state. The young man nevertheless informed his father that Jinta Inoue's son, Hasegawa or Naoto Inoue, was indeed a medium. Upon learning this, the policeman froze in shock, as he had no idea that this information was true and was trying to figure out where it came from. The girl kindly informed that Naoto Inoue had previously collaborated with them, and she had been collecting information about him. Now the investigator has speculated that Naoto Inoue may have actually been working for a secret organization and, using his mediumistic ability, extracted this forbidden knowledge from his mother's mind, but it remains a mystery why he is opposing them. In other words, his guesses are based on the drug for activating superpowers and the forbidden knowledge Hasegawa received. To confirm this, you must contact the officer present here. Adam understood that this man knew how to use deductive methods in investigation. Looking at his father, the young man tried to figure out his brilliant plan. It all turned out to be incredibly simple, and all that was needed was to find Jinta Inoue and then arrest him and put him in handcuffs. The son noticed a lack of emotion even in his interactions with an old friend, realizing that his father got straight to the point, putting efficiency above all else. In any case, the hero was deeply upset, but had already begun to think about this plan. Capture the head of a pharmaceutical company, Hali Jinta Inoue. Interrogate him with extreme force and torture to force him to reveal all the information about the secret organization. If such a simple plan had a chance of success, Adam and he would not have resorted to infiltrating the pharmaceutical company. However, the problem is that Jinto Inoue's whereabouts are currently unknown, and he hasn't appeared in the company at all lately, and no one knows where he disappeared to, and so the blitzkrieg will have to be suspended. However, the man insisted that they should not underestimate the police's capabilities, and Jinto Inoue was a major figure, and his movements would inevitably leave traces, and it would be much easier for them to track him than they thought. This point was clear to the young man, but if they were going to use the local police network to search, it was unclear how to conduct a secret interrogation with Jinto. Therefore, the police officer needed assistance who could help with the interrogation. They originally planned to file a request for the arrest of Jinto Inoue. Then after finding him, force him to go with them to the police station, and when he was on his way there, they would have the perfect moment to have sex with him. The faceless man wanted to know how Jinto would be arrested, and as long as public opinion considers him a decent and law-abiding businessman, he cannot be arrested just like that. This was no difficulty for the investigator, and he was going to fabricate some evidence and accuse him of the crime, and then he was going to confidently tell him that if he did not want all these accusations to fall on him, he had better go with them to the station and answer a few questions. If he turned out to be innocent, they would claim they had the wrong man and find someone from the black zone, accusing him of tampering with evidence, which could lead to a long sentence. Adam was shocked by what he heard, and she didn't understand how she could remain a policeman after that, but the man realized that when entering into a game with the scum and criminals of Haley, sometimes you have to play by their rules. Smiling, Faceless exclaimed that if his son knew how much he followed the rules of the game, he couldn't imagine how he would react. With a heavy sigh, the man admitted that he would never understand, and he would never know, but Sufu probably already guessed it. Looking at him, the girl realized that no other superpower holder had ever been so close to her, and if he attacked them now, she was afraid that both would die on the spot. In fact, Sufu understood that if he fought such a powerful opponent, only Adam would die. But the girl couldn't help but be curious about why he hid his abilities for so long, and if she were in his place, she would eagerly await the opportunity to use them. The young man immediately asked if she also wanted to become the owner of superpowers, and it turned out that she had dreamed of this since childhood, but over time she realized that she did not have this gift, and she was destined to be an ordinary person. Their conversations prevented them from concentrating on the matter, as they were afraid that the officer might suddenly betray them. Although the probability of this was low, however, if he suddenly decided to attack the secret organization, he would capture them too. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the boy exclaimed that their only chance would be to confront him together. It even seemed to Adam that she was sleeping now, and after all, at their first meeting he didn't trust her too much, but now something had changed. Of course, trusting information from a source in a dangerous area is not a sign of common sense, but morning reporter Haley can be trusted. At that moment, the girl realized that her real name had been revealed, and the guy knew that her name was Chloe DiCaprio. He had known about it for a long time and had no intention of sharing his secrets, but he felt it would be fair for her to know about it. After some time, The guy returned home and received a new message on his phone. In the message, the friend said that he had examined 2 of the boy's war trophies. A black wooden face statue that has the ability to create illusions when fused with supernatural power, but it was useless due to damage, and a silver needle, a hidden type weapon used to seal supernatural power. This needle is also known as the demon sealing needle. It can spread its effects to the entire body if it is pierced into the skin of a superpower user, but it is only effective against second and third class users. In addition, by piercing an ordinary person, she could destroy his supernatural gift. Remembering that Adam also had an unusual artifact, the guy decided to ask his friend what kind of object it was. It turned out that it was a living dead amulet, which allowed the owner to temporarily turn into a living corpse. As long as the brain remained intact, no physical damage could kill the wearer of this amulet. However, this artifact turns out to be rather useless. It takes 3 whole minutes to activate it, and if you fail to activate it, you can consider yourself already dead. In addition, its effect is limited to only 10 minutes, and after that time, the wounds received do not heal. So if you die permanently. Events developed further 2 days later, when surveillance of the pharmaceutical company began. The investigator even provided the protagonist with a police uniform so that he could act undercover. Remembering that police officers always take grenades with them when going on a combat operation, the guy asked for a fragmentation grenade. These grenades were only used against those with superpowers or similar strange types. It was quite a surprise for the guy to receive this grenade, but in reality it turned out to be worthless and useless, and the man knew that he would be asked to bring it, so he took it purely as a joke. Adam also changed her clothes, realizing that the officer had given them these outfits so that they could disguise themselves as regular police officers and infiltrate their ranks before kidnapping Jinto in Oe. This is exactly what happened, and in this way, they were preparing to kidnap one of the most influential people in the city. However, at the moment there is no need to kidnap him, since he is under the surveillance of the investigator and will be taken directly to the station. And however, if he confesses to his involvement in crimes, including murder, the situation may change. Everyone understood that such an individual would not make such mistakes when he declared his intransigence, but the outcome of events would depend not only on him. It turned out that the man had contacted the agency for a product that had supernatural powers and the ability to recognize lies. If someone around him lies, the device will instantly heat up to a temperature above 45 degrees, alerting its owner to the fact of the lie. To check his bracelet, the man turned to the faceless man and asked how old he was at the moment. The guy joked and replied that he was about 42 years old. The man was surprised by this answer and looked at the bracelet, but did not see any reaction. Adam realized that the faceless one could not be 18 years old, since he began his activities at the age of 15. The gist of the deal was to hunt criminals with superpowers while in a normal human body. However, the main character's age really surprised the girl. She didn't expect that he was already 42 years old. Stepping aside, the man admitted that he was simply lying and that his bracelet did not have such capabilities. At the same time, the policeman thought that the faceless man could not be that old, and if the detainee really was a murderer, he would confess faster than he realized it. Hearing this, Adam was shocked that a police officer would carry out vigilante justice on the street without thinking twice, and she wondered if his son knew about his methods. The man then repeated that he should not be forced to repeat it a second time, since his son, of course, would not know about it. Watching everything that was happening, the guy only noticed that the police seemed a little self-confident. Sometime later, the investigator and the police went to the pharmaceutical company. They walked through the corridors of the enterprise without any obstacles, looking around. Walking through these corridors, the girl did not understand where they got so much courage to immerse themselves in the feeling of the final level. The officer asked one of the employees to show them around the plant, but he replied that this was impossible due to commercial secrets. Also, some places require an iris scan to access things he doesn't have permission to do. As they arrived to investigate a theft, the employee said that a thief had broken in that morning, but the security guard had failed to apprehend him and the criminal had managed to escape. However, the investigator was there on a completely different matter and was immediately received by Mr. Inoue. A few minutes later, they found themselves in the office of the company owner, and he was glad to see his comrade after almost 6 months of separation. Each of them had their own affairs and families, and there was no longer the opportunity to gather at one call, as in school days. Before getting down to business, the company owner wanted to know why they had come. However, Jinta Inoue wanted to talk about something else. He believed that meeting old friends should be more than just business talk. The man saw no point in these conversations and stated that today they would only discuss business issues. The owner of the company immediately thought that it was probably related to their employment with the police. The officer announced that Han Tong would be arriving soon and that he would ask him just one question and then leave. The question was whether they were connected to the recent disappearances of people in the city of Halley. Upon hearing this question, the man immediately began to deny it, claiming that this was news to him. It turned out that at the same time, the bracelet really did signal the presence of lies in the surrounding radius. Jinta and Noe's comrade exclaimed that there was no point in continuing to pretend, since the police had brought in a special device that could detect deception. They immediately began to prepare for the collision, and the officer was already taking out a cigarette, and the criminal's comrade was calling on air magic. Suddenly, the head of the company asked them to stop, pointing out the excellent soundproofing of the room, and he reminded them that even if there was gunfire inside, the sound would not penetrate outside, but both of them, the officer and Su Sheng, had supernatural powers and would be heard. The criminal could not understand what his interlocutor was so frightening about, because the policeman explained the whole situation to him, and it reminded him of the murderer who was afraid of hurting Kara. It turned out that Jinta in no way meant that this might be their last conversation. However, the criminal was ready to do something for the sake of this friendship, which he had managed to win with difficulty, and he saw it as saving the situation, since he no longer had such a friend. After that, Jin Inoue called his friend Sheng Xing so that they could hug. Hearing this, Sheng Xing couldn't believe that the criminal was inviting him for a hug. The whole situation made the man laugh. In the past, he had a strong disgust for corruption and violation of the rules. But now he was part of the structure of the Alliance of Bearers of Unique Abilities, and his path was strewn with obstacles. Sheng Xing must realize the value of the drug that gives superpowers, and as long as this achievement remains the key to peace, even the Alliance will be forced to temporarily forget about crimes. Suddenly, the policeman interrupted his comrade, unable to listen to his nonsense, and he realized that his friend was no longer there. There was no point in continuing to pretend to be his friend and try to talk to him, and Sheng Xing believed that listening to him was like trusting a liar. Suddenly, the criminal remembered his words about the fact that the connections between people are not eternal, and parents and children, spouses, brothers, friends, none of them are immortal. The actual quarrel demonstrates this vividly, and Jinta, in no way, considered it a sad fact. The human heart is like a ship, constantly changing its parts, and as memories are forgotten, the old personality gives way to a new one, and spiritual death comes much faster than physical death. The policeman didn't want to listen anymore, and all these words seemed to him to be filled with hipster wisdom and detachment from reality, and the only thing that Sheng Xing cared about was his research on awakening superpowers. The criminal remembered that he had been told before that only by possessing superpowers could he advance in his research. Then Sheng Xing thought that Jin in no way allowed his son to extract forbidden knowledge from his wife's brain, but this turned out to be wrong. The confidence in the research into drugs that would give superpowers did indeed come from forbidden knowledge, but had nothing to do with his wife, and his son certainly would not support him in this matter. As it turned out, the forbidden knowledge was given to him by a mysterious person who appeared before him about a month ago with a damaged body. He didn't know where he got the forbidden knowledge about the theory of creating drugs that give superpowers, and he was missing some technical details, but it was still useful. Eventually, when he made a promise to Jinta that he would give him a copy if he could create the final product. However, Jinta unilaterally reneged on this promise, and his motive was simple. He had already passed on all the information and no longer saw the value in cooperation. The company owner also did not want to hand over valuable technical achievements to someone who wanted everything ready-made. The owner of the forbidden knowledge was dissatisfied and tried to steal the technical achievements, but his plan failed and he escaped. The policeman was overcome with anger, and he used his magical powers, and he decided that next time the enemy must fail, and the difference between him and the thief was that the thief would not be able to escape from the hands of the police. For a villain, such self-confidence seemed ridiculous, considering that he had a lot of guards who could protect him even from such a strong opponent. Jinta still wanted to know from his former friend where he got such confidence in victory, and no matter which side he is on now, he still has superpowers. The villain shouted that the entire company was full of his subordinates who were ready to help in the fight at any moment. Meanwhile, the police stormed the pharmaceutical company and conducted a raid, detaining all the security guards. The brave policeman Sheng Xing exclaimed that he also had many subordinates, and they were ready to help him at any time. The protagonist immediately launched an attack, but the villain's henchman began to defend himself using his supernatural powers. There were multiple super speed attacks just before the boy reached his opponent. This clash was impressive, as Su Fu was no match for such a strong opponent. However, the guy decided to take a break to think about how to win this fight. During his father's counterattack, the young man realized that it was time to attack and entered the battle again. Using his physical strength, Su Fu easily approached the main opponent to strike from behind. The villain responded by using a force barrier to prevent the enemy's attack. The force barrier was so powerful that the main character was unable to break through it. He realized that the enemy possessed objects with superpowers. Luckily, Adam had an artifact called the Separation Witness, which allowed him to penetrate the force barrier. Now the villain had nowhere to run, and he only began to beg for mercy. As soon as the girl broke through the power barrier, she instantly delivered a blow straight to Jinta in Inoe's head to completely incapacitate him. The attack was successful, and the girl easily emerged from under the force barrier. For the young man, the girl's actions were strange, since he could not understand what motives prompted her to inflict such serious injuries. At the same time, the police shouted that there was a threat of danger, as the supernatural objects were out of control. Since the supernatural objects could no longer be controlled, an explosion of enormous proportions occurred. As soon as the explosion occurred, the villain tried to escape, trying to remain unnoticed. The hero tried to stop him, but an enemy henchman immediately appeared in front of him, ready to attack. The villain had incredible speed and could easily deliver multiple attacks in just a few seconds. The smart guy was much smarter and stronger, so he easily defeated such a clumsy opponent and moved towards the main goal. After defeating the henchman, he immediately ran after the main enemy. Lying on the floor, the villain was in severe pain and could not understand how a person without superpowers could possess such terrible power. Sheng Xing was nearby, ready to detain the offender who was interfering with the police. Running around the building's outskirts, the hero was still looking for the main enemy and could not understand where Adam had disappeared to. He was also worried about something else and why the girl needed Jinta in Inoe's eyes. After some thought, the guy finally realized that there were hidden commercial secrets here, and in addition, access to some places required scanning the iris. In fact, Adam had evidence of separation, which made walls and doors no obstacle for him, but it is unclear why she used this method. It was now clear that she was going to enter the same place as last time, the room that could isolate supernatural abilities. Having captured one of the workers, the hero began to interrogate him about the location of a room that meets two conditions. Access is only possible through scanning the iris of the eye, and it has the ability to isolate superpowers. The worker had to report a room that met both conditions, as he now had a gun pointed at his head. Very frightened, the man began to tremble and replied that there was a laboratory nearby, behind the fixation center on the right side at the back. After the information was passed on, the worker was released, and the young man continued on his way to his destination. As he approached that very door, Su Fu realized that he was indeed left without a partner and would have to work alone. Turning around, the girl said that it wasn't really his fault. In this situation, no one is to blame for Adam turning into a devious villain. Now the girl had in her hands the technical achievement of a mysterious organization, the completed product of awakening superpowers. This item was called a spiritual medicine, and with its help one could awaken superpowers in an ordinary person. Thus, the young man realized that she was the very mysterious person who had passed on the forbidden knowledge to Jintu Inoue. Looking at the guy, the girl immediately decided to ask where he got this information from. After analyzing the current situation, he realized that Adam knew about the presence of spiritual medicine in this room, knew exactly its location and the way to access the room that could isolate superpowers. Holding the treasured artifact in her hands, the insidious villainess exclaimed how perfect it was. But apparently she had never visited that pharmaceutical factory, and Jinta Inoue had just mentioned that the one who had infiltrated the Haley Pharmaceutical Company that morning was that mysterious man. The reason why she was targeted by a mysterious organization is not because she, as a journalist, investigated something she shouldn't have, and after Jinta Inoue betrayed her, the initiator who passed on the forbidden knowledge to him, he also tried to kill the unwanted witness. In fact, Adam also did not expect such a turn of events, and she made a valid superpower contract with him called the Lunar Oath of Oblivion so that he would not break this promise. According to this oath, the first one to break the agreement will die. In this situation, no one could have imagined that it would be Jinta Inoue who would decide to break the agreement. In order to find someone who would agree to study forbidden knowledge, but would not betray her as a partner, she began selecting candidates a year ago. For her, as a person acting alone, this was a very difficult task. However, in the end, not only was she betrayed, but she was also unable to find a suitable place for research, which was simply a shame for Adam. The hero understood that she did not immediately give up on this, and chose to cooperate with Naoto Inoue in order to find a place to research the spiritual medicine with his help. However, the case was a little different, and Naoto Inoue did not have many secrets, and he was just a grown child full of sense of justice, and when he found out about his father's inhumane experiments, he wanted to stop him, and that's it. It was Adam who secretly gave him the keys to the truth, and then appeared before him in the guise of fair journalist Chloe DiCaprio, and she promised to use her influence and media resources to expose his father's atrocities, and he fell for it immediately. In the young man's opinion, something was wrong here, and her activities as a journalist and search for allies began a year ago. However, these two aspects contradicted each other, and one represented good, the other evil, and the first carried with it unforeseen dangers. As it turned out, the cunning girl had foreseen everything until the last moment, and had specially created the image of a fair journalist in order to win their trust. It was a lot of trouble, first killing and then replacing the identity, even to the point of using her image, and it would have been easier to find another willing, fair journalist. Because there was no real journalist standing in front of the main character, Adam began to take off her mask. Taking off her mask, she appeared before the young man in a completely different guise. Seeing this, the hero immediately asked when this whole game began. It turned out that this happened only 10 days ago, when the journalist did not yet know Su-Fu. So he realized that the stranger had killed Chloe DiCaprio and used her image to impersonate her, and it's no wonder that she had no qualms about changing her mask to pretend to be Adam and putting makeup on top of her mask. There was another mask underneath this mask, and Su-Fu was not originally part of her plan, but thanks to the information he received from Adam, he found a connection between the killer and the mysterious organization. This also helped her cooperate with Officer Su and help her know when Jinta Inoue would show up at Hallie's office. In the stranger's opinion, Su-Fu was the man who had completely charmed her. It's a shame that despite all his charm, he will still be forced to die at gunpoint. Suddenly, a multitude of illusions appeared around the main character and the girl, holding pistols in their hands, ready to fire at any moment. The evidence of separation created many mirages, and no one could hide from so many sights at once. Even if the victim realizes this, it will be impossible to attack the girl with so many mirages, and with each shot there will only be one real bullet, and it will be necessary to determine which one is real. This turn of events made the protagonist smile, and he decided to find out the name of this mysterious stranger. Many illusions hinted that she could be called Adam or Chloe, but the young man understood that these were simply the names of her masks. In this case, the girl believed that he should not know her real name. Since she herself was unwilling to give her name, Su-Fu could name her himself. It was a really interesting turn of events, and the girl was intrigued to see what name he would choose. Without hesitation, the protagonist replied that he would call his opponent Faceless. Hearing this, Adam assumed that it was more of a nickname than a real name. In fact, it was just an appeal, and after all, anyone could be faceless, he, she, or someone else. But the lady was afraid that this might cause confusion. Su-Fu knew that this would not cause any confusion, because in the end, only one faceless one would be able to leave this room. To win this battle, he decided to take action and threw a high-explosive grenade. Adam had given him a lesson beforehand, and now it was his turn. The girl was surprised by such actions because she realized that using the grenade would lead to the death of both of them, given its destructive potential even against people with supernatural abilities, and it was amazing that Shang-Xing decided to entrust it to such a careless guy. While Adam may be great at disguise, she leaves much to be desired as a fighter. At this time, the hero watched to see which of the illusions would begin to disappear. Fortunately, the enemy was discovered, and Su-Fu was able to attack her easily. Using his skills, he approached the villain as quickly as possible to deliver a devastating blow. If a high-explosive grenade had exploded, the only cover from it would have been the metal pedestal. Hiding would have meant immediately giving oneself away. Thus, Adam learned her lesson, because it is important to be aware of how one can detect it. Besides, Shang-Xing probably wouldn't have given him a real explosive grenade. And it turned out that the thrown grenade was empty, and the whole situation was a hoax. Suddenly looking back, the young man noticed that the girl's body was no longer there. He immediately realized that his opponent had probably escaped. Earlier, the hero had a strange dream in which he was walking somewhere. In front of him was a familiar door, related to his past life and the house where he lived. As soon as the door opened, there was an abyss behind it into which one could fall. As he fell into the abyss, memories from his real life appeared before the young man. Having fallen completely, he saw himself as still very small. The little boy saw the main characters who did nothing but yell at the confidently smiling villains, and he did not want to be that kind of hero. Suddenly another door opened behind him, and the young man decided to go to it without hesitation. Walking through the door, he saw his school years and himself sitting at a desk. By creating his costume out of pieces of paper, he hoped that the villains would be scared by his outfit, and that's exactly what he needed. Despite this, the main reason was still that he simply liked the suit a lot. The sight was truly breathtaking, and Su-Fu was proud of what he had become now. In the next scene, the hero was looking for information about how the capital's waters flow into the central rivers, about the so-called famous enterprises, and everything was very confusing. In the past, he didn't understand why there were no supernatural powers in this world, and if he had them, he could change a lot. Immediately after this, he moved to the street where he had previously been killed and realized that justice is indeed a complex concept. After witnessing his murder, Su-Fu began to move to an unknown location again. As soon as this happened, he found himself in a bar, sitting at the bar counter. Next to him was his old partner, who was talking about how, if the family of one of them was kidnapped, and the one who was committing the crimes was behind all this, then if they did not kill each other, then their families would suffer. In such a situation, all they could do was kill each other to get out of the difficult situation. Now, the one who remains alive will avenge the other. That was the main character's plan. Suddenly, we were back in the boy's mind, where the girl noticed that he really did have a heart of stone. Approaching him, the stranger decided to greet the indifferent man. Standing near the girl, the young man realized that she was already dead. Adam laughed and noted that in any case, her body was still there. Looking at her, Su-fu knew that the living dead seal would not help her. However, until he finds her body, he will not be able to be completely at peace. Now that the stranger could not be called indifferent, the hero still wanted to know what to call her now, but she only answered that let her be an indifferent shadow. Suddenly, she said that it was time to wake up and they should meet soon. Some time later, Su-fu's alarm clock rang, and the clock already showed 9:30. He immediately woke up from the alarm clock and turned it off. When he woke up, he couldn't understand whether he had really been in such a strange dream. Immediately after that, the phone rang, and he answered without hesitation. It was Hasegawa who wanted to meet. The meeting took place in a restaurant, and Su-fu immediately warned Hasegawa that the police were looking for him, but he already knew that. He spent a lot of time getting himself and his affairs in order and wanted to contact Adam, but he couldn't, so Hasegawa wondered where she was. Hearing this, Su was surprised that the guy didn't know yet, because this girl had passed on the forbidden knowledge to the Heli Pharmaceutical Company. This news really shocked him, and he couldn't believe it. He never expected Adam to get caught up in this, and it's just a shame that she ended up taking the superpower awakening drugs. In Hasegawa's opinion, this man really achieved what he wanted. Fortunately, the hero calmed down, knowing that she was devoid of supernatural powers. This surprised the guy because he didn't think that she didn't have such abilities. After that, Su-fu decided to tell about the needle that seals evil spirits, and the story was quite simple. She also used the living dead seal beforehand as a precaution. The guy also didn't waste any time, and at the moment of impact, he used a needle that sealed evil spirits. Now the protagonist moved on to questions and wanted to know if Hasegawa really killed Jinta Inoue. At that moment, Jinta Inoue had no eyes and was seriously injured, but he was still able to escape, and yet he died not far from the company building. A forensic examination showed that death was caused by a wound to the heart. It turned out that the young man really couldn't save him, as Jinta Inoue's father hypnotized himself to control his mind. This was done to prevent the emergence of feelings of guilt during the process of implementing the plan. According to Su-fu, he always despised the fickleness of human thoughts, and this may have been his motivation for pursuing superpowers. The son admitted that he really made this decision to save his mother and himself. That day, he used rituals and psychic abilities to track down the company's location. His father, dragging his scratched body, climbed out of the waiting room, out the window, and found himself outside the pharmaceutical company. Hasegawa stated that his father always taught him that a person should be fair, and even if he gained superpowers, he should not oppress the innocent. When someone sees that the strong is oppressing the weak, it is necessary to intervene and come to the rescue. All this time, the father insisted that his wife Hikaru had been in a coma for 3 years, and only with the help of a drug that awakens superpowers it is possible to strongly excite her consciousness, and then it will begin. What worried the young man was not this, but the fact that many innocent people were killed because of the development of this drug. The father continued to justify himself, saying that his parents had a good relationship when he was a child, but over time it deteriorated and his parents began to quarrel constantly. This did not happen for any particular reason. It is just that people's hearts are fickle and they get tired of each other. The father then told his son that when he was in high school, he witnessed his father kill his mother with an axe, and this event made him decide that he would never repeat their fate. By saying this, he wanted to convey the idea that he would never leave his beloved Hikaru. She's been in a coma for 3 years now, and although he would like to say that he will love her forever, he is gradually turning into the person he hates the most. The man often visits her, turns her over, wipes her body, which is losing its shape, and looks at her face, which is slowly losing its beauty. Determined to address her natural needs and find a better doctor, Jinta in no way decides that he must make her open her eyes again and hear her voice. The father orders his son not to interfere with this process, assuring him that this will fix all the problems. Pushing his father away, Hasegawa refuses to listen to him. He is very grateful to his mother for giving birth to him, but if she wakes up after he kills innocent people and goes back to sleep, he would rather submit to her will now. If she thanked him for the murders, he would not save her even if she was his mother 10 times over. Realizing that his son was against such methods, the father asked him to clearly state his position and decision not to save her. Hasegawa was determined to find a completely different way to save his mother, even if it took another decade, and he had no intention of giving up like his father. Jinta Inoue was subsequently killed because he was unworthy of life for destroying the lives of many innocent people. As a result, Hasegawa felt much better after telling the whole truth to the Faceless One. Sometime later, he still planned to surrender to the police so as not to be tormented by his conscience any longer. However, the protagonist had one more matter that he wanted to discuss with his partner. Although the clairvoyant policeman was unable to see that Hasegawa had killed his father, this will be revealed after examining the body. And also, apparently, in his life, he had never used hypnosis on himself. In fact, the hero wanted to say that Jinta in no way deceived his son, and he never hypnotized himself. Immediately after the young man told this to his partner, he decided to leave the restaurant, since there was nothing more to talk about. As he was leaving the building, Shengxing texted the protagonist that they needed to meet immediately on the top floor of Citibank. Arriving at the meeting place, Su Fu decided to give his father a friendly hint, and next time it would be better to choose safer places to discuss matters. The man simply responded to this by stating that he had no time to argue with the young man. The policeman decided to report that he had found one of Jinta Inoue's bodyguards. Having drawn an unfamiliar symbol, he asked the guy if he knew what it was. It turned out to be the emblem of the geocentric church, a notorious sect. This organization is bent on destruction, and its members are only eager to infect the planet, and the investigator assumed that they could be behind this incident. Jinta Inoue himself, perhaps out of desperation or seeing some benefit in it, decided to join. It is important not to underestimate the work of the geocentric church, especially when it comes to drugs that activate superpowers. Currently, the investigation involves experts from the Demon Control Bureau, the highest alliance with superpowers, and they fight not only the undead and monsters, but also criminals with superpowers. Therefore, the policeman advised him to restrain his ardor and know his place to avoid problems with the demon-fighting experts. When touching upon the geocentric church, one cannot fail to mention the loss of people that accompanies the emergence of dead spirits, and these spirits do not disappear, but accumulate underground due to the force of gravity. The geocentric church believes in the existence of an unseen, powerful ghost in the center of the earth, in constant darkness. This ghost is considered the supreme god of the church, and is called the Fallen One. The death of the Faceless Man's previous partner was clearly connected to this church. All he intended to do was find the key to the mystery. Having taken action, the young man contacted his comrade, who confirmed the presence of the man inside who had attacked Hasegawa the last time. This man is responsible for experiments on people. The other two are bodyguard hired by him from the black market. Suddenly, the bodyguards noticed that someone had secretly entered the room through the open door. The man yelled that he was not going to cook dinner for the guards because there were only enough eggs in the refrigerator for him. The man instantly froze in shock, unexpectedly seeing a strange creature close to him. This mysterious figure had no definite appearance, and he clearly did not come here for eggs. Looking at the stranger, the boy cried out, declaring that he had come from the church. This made the man even more wary, and he did everything he could to defend himself from the supposed attack. Holding the stranger against the wall, Su Fu ordered him to tell him everything he knew. He needed information about matters related to the geocentric church. Feeling the pain, the man wondered in surprise why he was being asked about this, considering that the mysterious stranger had just arrived from there. Finally, the guy admitted that he had been forced to lie about his church origins. Before punishing the stranger, Su Fu decided to demonstrate his strength by throwing one of the chicken eggs. The next second, he threw a chicken egg right at the refrigerator door. The refrigerator door was simply broken through, and the faceless man groaned, admitting that his ribs were definitely not as strong as the refrigerator door. But the hero was sure that if the villain continued to scream so loudly, his vocal cords would soon be damaged. After releasing the offender, he again ordered him to tell how he was connected with the geocentric church. Experienced fear took possession of the man, and he shouted that he was ready to tell everything. When Jinta Inoue unexpectedly discovered a substance that gave him supernatural powers, he called together a group of researchers to form a secret team. Among them were those who were forced to, as well as those who were tempted by the idea of personal gain. Residents of dangerous areas were recruited to kidnap the subjects. Soon, two prominent supernatural powers learned of Jinta Inoue's plans and attempted to steal the scientific data. These people called themselves Lost Believers, members of the geocentric church. Jinta Inoue was left with no choice and accepted the faith of the geocentric church to ensure his safety, swearing allegiance. The man, trembling with fear, admitted that this time he really did tell everything he knew. However, the young man did not believe him and began to take out a huge kitchen knife. Against all odds, he decided to find out whether the intruder had participated in experiments on people before he was hypnotized, and how many people he had killed with his own hands. In extreme fear, the offender began to shout that he admitted his mistakes and intended to change, and he deeply regretted it and stated that he had become a different person since leaving Haley Pharmaceutical Company and was not going to do such things anymore. The criminal promised to compensate for everything he had done before, but Su Fu realized that the owner of this apartment had first been killed and then dinner had been prepared. Hearing this, the man realized that he would not be forgiven so easily because he had committed many more crimes than he admitted. Despite everything, the offender insisted that he had some wealth, even if it was illegally acquired, and he had spent his whole life accumulating this wealth. He wanted to give everything to survive because he didn't want to die. In the end, it turned out that the intruder had not told the whole truth, and his sacrificial offer did not impress Su Fu. Over time, the faceless one realized that his only interaction with the world was now limited to sensations, and through this organ he would only experience pain, because his life would become a sacrifice. To perform the ritual, the young man used candles, time, and a bowl. Su Fu didn't know before that the intruder had killed the previous owner of the apartment, and he should have immediately denied it or blamed it on his guards. Then perhaps Su Fu would at least have some faith that this man had truly changed. Taking the sacred pen in his hands, the faceless man hoped that this time would not be like the last one, and that he would not become as crazy as Hasegawa. To perform the magical ritual, the young man drew circles around the pentagram using a magic pen. Previously, this scoundrel liked to conduct experiments on people. Today was his time to become a test subject. He awaited the same fate as those who died in his experiments. With the help of the man's soul, Su Fu began to summon magical spirits to give him power. What was happening gradually began to confuse the faceless one. Soon the spirit of a girl appeared, who exclaimed that there were no temptations, worries, material things, sins, and in the end, everything in this world would disappear. To complete the ritual, the spirit of the stranger touched the young man, and he immediately felt changes in his body. Looking down at his hands, he wondered if this was really a superpower he had just received. After several strikes, Su Fu realized that his speed and strength had not changed, even his blood circulation had not accelerated, and there were no other manifestations. He had absolutely no idea how to use this ability and why it was needed at all. Perhaps this was a side effect of the sacrificial ritual. After some time, Su Fu decided to call his partner, who said that he checked the news about the medicines, and everything happened as he expected, and the control was very strict, and such medicines could not be found on the black market. These drugs are capable of reducing perception and making the person taking them somewhat immune to psychological attacks, and they are indeed difficult to find. If the hero can take these drugs during the sacrifice ritual, his perception will be greatly reduced, which may lead to a stronger immunity to the side effects of the sacrifice. Perhaps then he will be able to figure out what happened during the ritual. Luckily, the young man knew someone who could make the medicine, and perhaps his partner could help with the investigation. In fact, he only knew the location of this man, his nickname, and that he could make a medicine, and that was all. This man's name was Dr. Turin, and Su Fu immediately decided to go to him. Sometime later, events took place at the station. Many were surprised to see an unusual traveler at the station. It turned out that this traveler was familiar with the main character and immediately ran to him. This strange guy's name was Goma, and he claimed that Su Fu could call him by his full name. Thus, not Goma, but Alvis Christopher. After laughing, the boy suggested that Su Fu continue calling him Goma because it was easier. Looking at his bag, Su Fu couldn't understand why Goma had brought so much luggage with him. It turned out that the protagonist's father asked Goma to take all this luggage, which he now carried in his arms. Looking at the boy, the young man realized that his father was worried about him going alone and advised him to find a trusted travel companion for a while, and Goma was his trusted man in the bureau, although he was now suspended due to recent events. At the moment, he is simply accompanying him, the chief's son, on this journey. However, the guy had a strange feeling as if he had seen this man somewhere before, and his name seemed to sound familiar. The friendly guy offered Su Fu some food and insisted that he take it. Although the young man was grateful for the offer, he wanted to explain that he really didn't need anyone to take such care of him, but his boss said that it was his responsibility. The guy listened to his boss all this time without question, even if he seemed unfair, and he punished him for his mistakes. Goma said that Commander Su recently sent him to the Haley Pharmaceutical Company under the guise of a security guard, where he met with the faceless man. It later emerged that although he had met with him, he had done nothing about it, and was therefore suspended. Hearing this, the young man decided to ask if Goma supported the faceless one. And indeed, the fellow traveler replied that he still supported him. All this time, the young man realized that the faceless man is a criminal because he violates order and kills whoever he wants. This was his father's opinion too. His father believed that the faceless man was of no use, that he only acted in his own interests, and that it was wrong to support him, especially as a policeman. Although this opinion was wrong, the boy still believed that the faceless one was not a bad person. He did kill many people, but they were all criminals, and if killing the bad guys ends up saving the lives of many good people, then that behavior can be justified. The hero suggested that perhaps the faceless one is not guided by this. He is rather selfish, and kills criminals only because it suits his personal motives. As he listened to this, Goma reflected that no matter the motives, the faceless one was still a villain. Moreover, as it turned out, the faceless one saved his younger sister. His younger sister, Helen Christopher, said she was recently kidnapped by a seemingly ordinary man, but then a boy suddenly appeared and saved her by knocking out the kidnapper with a spray bottle. When she came to, he had a mask with a beak in his hands, and he told her that everything was okay now and she could go home. Hearing about the mask with the beak, he immediately realized that it was the faceless one, and decided that if he ever met him, he would definitely help. That's why Goma covered for the faceless man when he infiltrated the pharmaceutical company, even though he was eventually knocked out, and now the cops don't seem to trust him. Passing by one of the stations, the hero saw an unusual girl sitting in a wheelchair. His partner informed him that they had just arrived in Yenshan, and there was still a long way to go before they reached Anqi. So he decided to ask Su Fu if he wanted to take a nap. Having politely declined, the guy promised to wake up his friend if anything happened. After this, Goma decided to get some sleep and fell asleep instantly. Immediately after that, Su Fu started scrolling through his phone, thinking about Dr. Turin, whom he first heard about from Adam. According to her, Dr. Turin was working in the vicinity of Anshin, and although she had no reason to trust him, he had no choice but to try his luck. Even if he asked the drones to collect data, he had little information about Dr. Turin, neither his past nor his age, let alone his appearance. The hero only knew that he was wandering around the Alliance, considered a wandering doctor, and those who saw him described him differently. Some said that he was a man, some that he was a woman, and some claimed that he was elderly. There are also those who said that he was young or even a child. In general, no one was sure about the veracity of the rumors, and the whole city was full of strange gossip, which created a rather suspicious atmosphere. Some time later, events took place in the city of Anshin, not far from a Zoroastrian temple, which was said to have a history of more than 100 centuries. The Alliance has the largest following of Zoroastrianism, and Zoroastrians believe mainly in flames and consider the sun to be the supreme god, and according to rumors, the completion of this temple is associated with a powerful possessor of superpowers. Turning to his comrade, Su Fu decided to inform him that the place they were heading to should be on the other side. Walking through the streets, the guy asked his friend if he liked Zoroastrianism, to which Goma answered in the affirmative. The guy laughed and exclaimed that he himself was not a Zoroastrian, and Goma could rest easy. The good-natured guy asked Su Fu to hold on to his shoulder, since the River Dolphin Hotel he mentioned was still 2 blocks away and the streets were full of tourists. And if his boss's son also gets hurt, then it will be unknown what Goma will do, since he will have to report to Captain Su. After thinking for a while, Su Fu decided to ask Goma if he really looked like he could get hurt easily. Feeling uneasy, Goma noted that they should continue on their way, since they first needed to get to the hotel and book a room there. After walking a few dozen meters, Su Fu decided to ask Goma if he was disgusted. This question really confused the traveler, and he couldn't even think of how to answer it. The question was quite justified because not only was he expressing his displeasure at something he didn't like, but he was also pointing out his independence, since he, as an incompetent invalid, could not travel without an escort, and if he had not insisted on going to Anqi, he would not have to be an escort now. Su Fu even thought that his escort probably thought of him as a dissolute policeman's son who only knew how to enjoy his father's attention while causing inconvenience to others, and therefore despised him. Unable to bear such words, Goma shouted out that this was not so, because Captain Su Fu was his savior and benefactor, and therefore, Captain Su's son also bears a benefaction, and he could not despise him. Hearing this, the hero could not believe that his father could really be his savior. Sometime later, events took place in a hotel. Good-natured Goma laid out the bed, because the boss ordered Su Fu to sleep on pure cotton sheets, otherwise he might get a rash. He specially asked him to bring these sheets with him. Although the boss usually appeared quite strict, he was actually a very caring person, Goma believed. His son was skeptical about this because his father was a SWAT captain and he couldn't be careless. The partner still decided to find out why Su Fu decided to come to Anqi, because the name of the city alone sounded gloomy and frightening. The name of the city was indeed not the most pleasant, and he did not come here solely for tourism. On this occasion, Goma asked why Su Fu decided to go to that city. The guy decided to explain that he was looking for Dr. Turin. What he is about to tell must remain a secret, and therefore Goma must not tell his father anything. and the reason for his search is that he hopes to cure his hands and legs. This was a compelling argument, given the complexity and age of his injuries, which even a hospital could not cope with. The boy then said that he had heard of Dr. Turin as a talented traveling doctor with amazing abilities who was rumored to be an onshi, and so he came here, although he did not have high hopes, but just decided to give it a try. Meanwhile, the protagonist received a message from his partner that he had found out where the doctor was last seen and possibly knew his location. However, Goma wanted to understand why he couldn't just tell his boss about it, but Sufu hoped that his secret would remain a secret, since if his father found out, he might think that the boy was too worried about his disability. This can create unwanted tension that will affect their relationship. Ultimately, Goma decided to find out how the guy planned to convince Dr. Turin to treat him. The guy immediately pointed to a place where he thought the doctor might be and explained that they first needed to find him before discussing treatment. Sometime later, they went into a bar where, as it turned out, a man named Dr. Turin had recently stayed, but he was no longer there, and the remaining money would probably be enough for a month's stay. This really surprised the guys, and if his name was really Dr. Turin and he was staying here, then he should have shown some documents, one of the policemen suggested. The woman explained that the bar was not very strict about registration and that customers simply had to pay and show their ID. Soon she showed an ID with the doctor's photo. Seeing this, Goma was surprised to learn what this doctor looked like. As it turned out, the woman couldn't remember exactly what he looked like without looking at a photograph, and it was clear that he had only left yesterday. Meanwhile, the protagonist's partner reported that the person he had heard about was Jinta, Inoue's former bodyguard, who had recently arrived in Onshi, and his intentions remained unknown. The day before, the same bodyguard went to Onshi, but his purpose remained a mystery. Goma tried to persuade the boy to leave, claiming that they had probably come here in vain, since Dr. Turin had most likely already left the city. The hero realized that yesterday he saw the departure of Dr. Turin, a believer who looked tired, and perhaps there's a connection between his departure and the appearance of a strange event. While walking by the river, Goma suggested that Su Fu stay in Onshi for a couple of days to see the local sights. It was a great opportunity to take a closer look at the city, as they couldn't figure out why Onshi was so unfortunate to be called by the police. Suddenly, someone behind them exclaimed, linking the name Onshi with the ancient nightmare monster that lived here centuries ago. Turning around, Su Fu saw the familiar face of the girl standing behind him. It was the same girl he had seen at the station, sitting in a wheelchair. The woman told them about ancient legends associated with two moons that shone in the sky 6 centuries ago. According to her, the emergence of a powerful spirit from the depths of the earth caused one of the moons to disappear into an abstract universe. This moon, which passed into the abstract universe, is now known as the Moon of Oblivion. The terrifying being that caused this is called the God of Doomsday, and its arrival brought 5 centuries of chaos and destruction. Goma wondered how this related to the monster from the legend of Onshi. He knew that 6 centuries ago, the appearance of the God of Doomsday had brought many dead spirits to the surface, turning the planet into a place of nightmares. Onshi was fortunately in a low-level disaster zone, and at that time, a powerful mage took control of the city, preventing even greater losses. However, even this magician had his own problems, and he plunged into the hopelessness of tragic reality, seeking solace in his dreams. He knew that such thoughts were unacceptable, but the power of his imagination was too strong. As the force responded to his imagination, it created a pleasant dream for him and plunged him into it. But in reality, it was the other way around, and his power was destroyed by the breath of death from outside, and the magician turned into a nightmare, wandering the world. He literally became a nightmare. This creature was the embodiment of nightmares that could visit anyone. He repeated his tragic nightmare day and night, drawing into it those who found themselves in his path. Despite the fact that humanity has already survived a terrible catastrophe and restored civilization, the nightmare still torments it with its tragic memories. He repeats his nightmares over and over again, unable to free himself from this heavy burden. The story made Goma tremble, but he still wanted to know where this mysterious man was. The hero slammed the ground and announced that this man was lying right under their feet. That is why the city was named Onshi in honor of this man. The girl in the wheelchair also warned that superpowers can sometimes turn against their owners. This is why having superpowers doesn't always bring joy. The alarmed policeman realized that the source of trouble was under their feet, and it was sealed. It happened about 100 years ago, shortly after the creation of the Alliance, when several powerful mages joined forces to seal the monster. Today, the area is popular with tourists, helping to boost the local economy. Goma wondered how such a gloomy place could become a tourist attraction. However, it was his tragic history that attracted the attention of tourists to this place. Looking at the girl, Goma noticed that she could only move her head, and perhaps she was not only unable to stand, but also blind. The silent woman behind her looked even stranger. Although she looked ordinary, something about her didn't seem entirely human. Out of horror, Goma asked Su-fu to leave there, as the stories about that place made him tremble. They were traveling together in the same carriage, and Goma wanted to know if they had come here for the sights. The girl denied this, saying that they were looking for Dr. Turin. Hearing this, Goma revealed that their goal was also to find Dr. Turin to treat his arms and legs, and that his companion was only helping him. It was a strange coincidence, as the girl had a similar situation after her accident, and she had heard of Dr. Turin's excellent reputation in matters of disability. Their hopes were dashed when they were informed that Dr. Turin had left the hotel the previous day. However, the doctor seemed suspicious, and perhaps if they continued coming here for a few more days, they would be able to meet him. The girl suggested that since they were already friends in misfortune, they could spend time together as tourists and explore the city. The offer seemed attractive, but Goma declined it because they had urgent business and could not afford to rest. They were forced to refuse the disabled woman and go to bed to get a good rest. Later, they returned to their room and discussed how delicious the beef stew had been for dinner and hoped that it would be served again tomorrow. Goma wondered how safe it was that the nightmare monster was sealed away and worried that if they fell asleep, the monster might break free. Su-fu assured him that everything had been calm in Anchi for 100 years and nothing terrible should happen. However, a few hours later, strange events occurred. The main character suddenly woke up and decided to examine the room. Turning on the light, he discovered that his partner was not on the bed. Entering another room, he noticed a mirror that reflected something strange. In its reflection, he saw himself, as he had once been, a journalist for an evening newspaper. Understanding what was happening, Su-fu assumed that the nightmare monster had come to life and that something terrible was about to happen. Opening the window, he saw a meteorite starting to fall on the city. There was a problem with Anchi's ceiling, and the power of the nightmare monster had penetrated into the outside world, pulling him into the dream, or there was an intruder who was acting with evil intentions against him. This magician used his dreams to connect his dreams with the dreams of other people. Meanwhile, someone was knocking persistently on the door as if trying to get inside. The door was suddenly knocked down, and an unknown entity burst in with determined intentions. Su-fu, looking at this entity, realized that in front of him was a zombie, ready to attack. The angry villain opened his mouth, ready to attack and bite the hero. Using his skills, the boy managed to dodge the bite. However, upon examining his hand, he noticed the wound and realized that his physical abilities had returned to their previous state. Strength, speed, even combat prowess, all these skills were forgotten again. His current state was like a loss of skills, comparable to forgetting letters when you pick up a pencil and don't know where to start, as if you were turned off by a switch. He needed to get back to his old skills. This is not the time to delay. You need to do it right away. With concentration, he began to regain his skills little by little. Now his state was reminiscent of the moment when you remember how to write a word that you had previously forgotten and carefully write it on paper. Taking the book, he attacked the impudent zombie who decided to break into his apartment and attack him. It was an incredible pleasure for him because he could take revenge on his enemy. This time, the zombie is no longer able to fight, as his head is now separated from his body and does not obey him. As he left the room, the boy felt like some invisible force was slowly pulling him into this strange dream from which he couldn't get out, and he was curious about where Goma was now. There were many evil zombies, and they intended to attack Su-fu, seeing him as a potential victim. A mistake in a fight with zombies could turn out to be extremely expensive, as even one miss could lead to tragic consequences, and it only takes hitting them in the eyes or mouth, and you become one of them. Su-fu needed to find a way to wake up as soon as possible, and the easiest solution seemed to be to kill the one who was seeing this nightmare in his sleep. However, in this situation, the nightmare monster itself is most likely doomed to death. The entire city and its buildings were destroyed, and only zombies roamed the streets in search of their victims. The most important thing for the guy now was to seize the initiative and take control of the situation. Entering one of the supermarkets, he began to look for food in order to survive in this world as long as possible. While looking through the goods, he noticed that some of the packages had just been opened, and it seemed that in order to figure out what was happening, he would need to find survivors. Seeing the zombie, the hero realized that he needed to attack immediately and immediately grab his axe. Suddenly, someone approached him from afar and warned him not to go outside, pointing out the danger. This mysterious stranger advised to wait until the zombies came closer. Watching him, Su-fu realized that this guy had super strength. Feeling the presence of a superhuman, the boy realized that it was someone with incredible power, perhaps even comparable to his own. As soon as the zombies left, the stranger began calling out to the hero, warning that the noise they had made could attract even more zombies. Immediately after this, they headed to another part of the city to hide from a large number of opponents. Once at the abandoned factory, the stranger apologized to the hero and explained that it was an emergency. To get rid of all these creatures quickly, he needed to let them get closer. The stranger also asked if the boy was injured, and fortunately, Su Fu remained unharmed. Suddenly, the guy announced that he would have to leave first because of urgent matters that needed to be focused on. Not understanding how one could have urgent matters during the apocalypse, the hero nevertheless asked what matters were being discussed. It turned out that this strange man was looking for a guy who moved with difficulty and had a bandage over his right eye. Hearing this, Su Fu realized that this strange man was looking for him. The boy also said that his name was Su Fu and that he had made a promise to his father to look after him. His job was to ensure his safety and bring him home safe and sound. That was his mission. And under no circumstances could I let him down, otherwise he would never forgive himself. Looking at this guy, the hero did not immediately recognize him as Goma, since he had changed a lot. It was obvious, because everything happened only in a dream, and the main character also changed beyond recognition. After some time, they heard that zombies were approaching nearby, and they did not know what to do to finish them off once and for all. Fighting these monsters with conventional means was extremely difficult, and if they had the ability to wield fire magic, perhaps it would have helped them win. After hearing the information about fire magic, Goma seemed to realize something and realized that not all was lost. Thus, he decided to try to master fire magic in order to destroy the opponents who would soon find themselves in this building. Using his magical abilities, Goma took action, seeking to destroy all the zombies in his path. Looking at Gomu, Su Fu knew that despite his memory, he had a strong regenerative ability, and somehow it worked. The guy actually used fire magic and successfully destroyed the approaching zombies. A huge number of aggressive creatures were approaching Goma, and he tried to hold them back. Despite the severe pain, the young man managed to defeat all the opponents surrounding him. The hero looked at his former comrade and asked if everything was okay. Tensing from the attacks surrounding him, Goma replied that he was fine. At that very moment, Su Fu realized that Goma not only had the ability of accelerated regeneration, but also another superpower. Coming closer to his partner, he said that there was no need to strain and fight. It was enough to simply dodge and avoid the zombies' attacks. But Goma insisted that these zombies were not worthy of pity, and as long as they were here in captivity, they would not be able to find peace. The hero suddenly realized that Goma still believed that they were in reality and not in a dream. The partner suddenly realized that the guy in front of him did not have superpowers, but only his abilities manifested themselves in the form of physical strength. Su Fu could think of nothing better to say than that he was as if faceless because he could not reveal his true nature to Goma. Otherwise, it will be difficult for them to avoid clashes in this dream full of chaos and violence. Smiling good-naturedly, Goma announced that he was leaning toward impersonality and introduced himself as Alvis Christopher. Laughing, the faceless one replied that he already knew about it, and in the past he worked as a security guard at the Heli Pharmaceutical Company, and his nickname was Goma, and Su Xingxing was his benefactor. The guy was amazed at how much the faceless one knew about him, and realized that he probably really deserved to be faceless with such amazing intellectual abilities. Upon arriving at one of the abandoned buildings, the company decided it was time to take a rest. Entering one of the rooms, Goma asked the faceless man if they really should wait for dawn here, since they didn't have time to rest and they still had to find Su Fu. Suddenly, the young man explained that there was no real dawn here. In the apocalypse, there is no sunrise, there is only a dark night and the moon, and it is not because the earth has stopped rotating or the sun has disappeared, and it is just dark and that's it, with no explanation. So the faceless one agreed to help in the search for the man, but only if Goma would obey him. And now he wants his partner to rest and come to his senses, and then they can continue the work. Then the hero began to ask his partner about what he had said earlier about his superpower, about super fast regeneration. It turns out that Goma now also has the ability to control fire. This is his new specialization. In fact, the guy got burns 10 years ago. One day, he went to the mountains with a tourist group, and even though they didn't know each other, the atmosphere was wonderful. Then they appeared, the dying believers. Suddenly, monsters straight out of a horror story appeared, capturing everyone as a sacrifice to revive the spirit. The abductees included not only them, but also many other people, about 100 people, and they were all locked in a gloomy cave, causing a huge stir in the community. No one could move, only listen to the prayers of the withered priest. Soon everything began to burn, quietly and calmly. No one present made a sound. Supporting his comrade, the faceless man said that it was already in the past, and there was no need to worry about it. At this time, Goma also caught fire, and the fire engulfed his body. Hearing this, the young man assumed that in such a situation his superpower had awakened. It was true, his superpower had awakened, but it turned out to be a curse rather than a blessing. His power was out of control, and he could no longer control it. Now Goma will never be able to forget how he became a victim of sacrifice. Every time he remembers the feeling of fire, his superpower reacts to his imagination, producing flames and burning his skin. The more he fears, the stronger the flame burns, and he tries to forget, but the flame of memories only grows stronger, bringing him pain. Goma is plunged into a cycle of sleepless nights and daytime nightmares. This explains why his superpower sometimes rebels against him. The hero understands that the super-fast regeneration arose from Goma's desire to survive and not burn alive. Captain Su appeared before him, put out the fire, and taught him how to control the flames. Although he has not yet fully mastered this art, he can prevent the flame from dying out. Su Fu begins to understand why Goma appeared to him in his dream as a man in bandages. This reflects his perception, and therefore he considers Su Shengxing as his savior and benefactor. For Goma, it was not only gratitude for saving his life, but also hellish torment, and he was simultaneously burning and quickly recovering, experiencing unbearable pain. Su Fu couldn't imagine how Goma could survive such a situation and return to normal life with optimism on his face. He had previously considered him a naive simpleton, but now he realized that he had underestimated him. Looking at his comrade, Su Fu decided to acknowledge his efforts and explain that perhaps he simply lacked the proper opportunity to fully control the flames. These words really made Goma happy, because he did not expect that he would be able to control the flame. He noticed that this man was easily pleased and realized that this could be his strength.